Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. I'm delighted to be here again with Brother Firas Zahabi. We're going to be speaking about the Mohammed Hijab Jordan Peterson discussion. It's all over the internet. You know, people are writing about it, they are reacting to it, and they're discussing it. And because of Firas's background in philosophy and for the last 20 years, you know, looking into these topics in quite some depth, it's really important to get his insight when it comes to this discussion. So firstly, assalamu alaikum, bro, and how you doing and how's everything?
Alhamdulillah, very good. Everything is great. Thank you. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. So I'm sure you've seen the discussion. Just
Yes.
some, you know, to get the viewers sort of a little bit warmed up. You know, what did you think about even this discussion taking place? So you get, you know, someone like Mohammed Hijab who's in the Dawah. You get Peterson who's, you know, very well known, right? And no one really expected this sort of discussion to take place. So what are your thoughts on this?
I absolutely loved it. I think it's exactly the way things should be. There should be a civil discourse with respect, mutual respect, trying to understand one another. I really felt that both men were truly trying to understand one another. There's too much polemics or trying to be funny and insulting, and so much immaturity when it comes to discussing ideology. There's so much politicization. There's so much drama, because if you don't put drama, you don't get the clicks. If you don't get the clicks, you don't get the cheddar.
Yeah.
And you should do that with everything but religion. You know, don't try to get clicks with the religion. In my opinion, like, I think you should try to keep that sacred. If there's nothing sacred in the world, if your religion is not sacred to you, then there's nothing in the world. There's just really nothing. I think they did a very they set a very good example for the rest of the world. Like, I find it embarrassing personally when I see a Christian guy or a Muslim guy or any other religion, a Jew, acting like a fool on the internet, trying to get click. I think it's really, you know, I don't mind the entertainment element. Just don't be insulting, don't be vulgar. When people are vulgar talking about religion, when people are being lewd and they're talking about religion, I just find it's very embarrassing.
Yeah.
You know, so I think they did a really good job. It was very respectful, it was academic, it was intelligent, it was classy. I felt that they covered a lot of ground. They shortened the divide. They did a really good job. I'm really happy with them.
Alhamdulillah. And you're absolutely spot on that there has to be a maqam, a status for the sacred. You know, when you make the sacred up for mockery in the same way you would with anything in life, then there's nothing of value and all you get left with is chaos. So there's a lot of mutual respect, like you rightly said. So there's a lot to unpack. Now, the first thing I wanted to highlight was a discussion that they had when it comes in regards to God's existence and the idea of not basically arguing for God's existence, like Peterson was arguing that it shouldn't be a proposition. And then obviously Hijab brought up the discussion of the fitra. So I'm just going to play that clip.
And then force the person, so to speak. I don't imply any malice on his part, but as soon as you accept that about the existence of God is that he will formulate the argument in propositional terms, and then force the person, so to speak. I don't imply any malice on his part, but as soon as you accept that the battle is to be won on propositional grounds, you've already accepted a certain definition of God. And I think you lose the argument instantly. I think the argument for instinct, something like that, is much more powerful. Because one of the things I'm led to wonder when you laid out your argument is, well, what purpose does belief in God serve, or your faith in God, let's say? And I think belief, see, it's also really interesting to try to distinguish between belief in something and faith in something. Like, if you have, imagine you have faith in the good. And so how do you demonstrate that? Well, you believe that good is more powerful than evil. You believe that you should act in a manner that's appropriate to the good. And so then you act that way. And that's the faith. The faith is demonstrated in actions.
Yes.
But it's not exactly propositional. And, you know, partly because I would say, if you look at good and evil, for example, it's not that easy to make the case that.
Are you getting the echo?
Yeah, which is what. So I muted you. I muted you to get rid of the echo.
Okay, I was trying to mute myself. Actually, I wasn't sure if I helped.
Yeah, it did.
You
So
want me to mute myself?
no, it's okay. I can mute you on my end.
Okay.
But did you get the gist of what was?
I did, but it was kind of hard to make it. It was kind of hard to make it.
I'll just play it again.
If you don't mind, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So everybody watching online, let me know if there's still an echo. And I've muted Firas.
Debating people like Richard Dawkins about the existence of God is that he will formulate the argument in propositional terms and then force the person, so to speak. I don't imply any malice on his part, but as soon as you accept that the battle is to be won on propositional grounds, you've already accepted a certain definition of God. And I think you lose the argument instantly. I think the argument for instinct, something like that, is much more powerful. Because one of the things I'm led to wonder when you laid out your argument is, well, what purpose does belief in God serve, or your faith in God, let's say? And I think belief, see, it's also really interesting to try to distinguish between belief in something.
Yeah, now before I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you now. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of sum up what he's saying thus far.
Sure.
He's saying, look, should you argue for God in the following way? Like, should you make propositional logic? Like, for instance, proposition 1, everything in the universe has a cause. That's proposition 1. Proposition 2, the universe is a thing. Therefore, if proposition 1 is true and proposition 2 is true, everything in the universe has a cause. The universe is a thing. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Would you use that kind of logic to prove that God exists? Would you use that type of logic? Or would you say he said the word instinct, but I think what he meant was innate. Philosophers would say innate. It's inborn. I already know. I don't actually believe in God. I know God. I know about it. So for instance, I cannot have innate knowledge of empirical events. For instance, I can't say, there's 877 billion fish in the sea. I have an innate feeling that's the answer. No, that's not innatism. You can't say something about the empirical world. Innatism is like, I stubbed my toe and it hurt. I don't need anybody to tell me if it hurt or not. I'm feeling it directly. Yes, I'm in pain. Even if you give me the most logical argument to tell me that I'm not in pain, I won't believe you. I'm feeling the sensation directly. I'm not using logic. I'm not using an interpreter. There's no mediation between me and the pain. I'm feeling it directly. That's what we mean when we say intuition. So he's saying, look, it's an innate belief or instinct, like he said. Isn't that more powerful? And he's correct. And this is actually, it's amazing because this is what Islamic philosophers and theologians have said in the past. You can get to God via logic. You can get to God in two ways, they say. Via logic, yes, that's correct. Ghazali will tell you can get to God via logic. Or, more powerful way, you already know God. You are born upon the fitra, like Muslims say, you're born upon the fitra. So anybody who gives you an argument, even if it seems convincing, but it leads you to atheism, you already know you're going to reject it via instinct. You're like, hey, wait a second. No, I know something. You cannot convince me otherwise. Your argument must be flawed somewhere. And this is where we find ourselves. We are all flawed logicians. I don't care how great at math you are. You can make an error. You need another mathematician to come and verify you. And no matter how many mathematicians you get to verify you, there could always be the possibility of a mistake, an oversight or something, or principles of mathematics we haven't figured out or understood yet. Paradoxes of mathematics. There are PhDs in mathematics today. Today, they exist today, not just yesterday, a long time ago. No, today. They think that there's a certain number that's the highest number possible. There is no higher number. You cannot add +1.
Yeah.
When you ask them what that number is, they say, we don't know, but it can't be otherwise because the alternative is a paradox. So there are things about mathematics today we don't understand. And logic is just mathematics with words. We follow logical laws like they do in mathematical world. But is anybody here a perfect mathematician, a perfect logician? This is the Ibn Taymiyyah argument. Heisenberg, he didn't agree with Schopenhauer. Two geniuses of their time don't agree with each other, fundamentally believe in completely opposite things. Heraclius didn't agree with Parmenides. Two geniuses of their time fundamentally disagree with one another. Whose logic are you using? So he's saying, look, it's so hard to get all these people to agree. And isn't the instinct of the argument of faith greater? I personally believe you should do both. Okay, so I mean, he's posing a very interesting question that the Islamic world has wrestled with for many, many years. So it's amazing that he's coming to that conclusion already so early. I don't know how far we are in the podcast, but it seems quite early still already.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you know, you highlighted some of the Islamic thinkers and philosophers in the past who raised this issue, and that obviously Peterson brought this up right at the beginning. I think one of the reasons may be that because he has directly engaged with the new atheists like Dawkins and Sam Harris and others, he's realized the difficult struggle you're going to be under when the burden of proof is upon you, as opposed to a situation where we start off with an instinctual belief in God. So when you make God purely into a propositional concept to be discussed and in a way hostage to argumentation, then you are at a severe disadvantage, because it is so much easier to make a negative argument or to make a take potholes at someone's argument than make a positive argument. And one of the problems with certain new atheists, like for example Matt Dillahunty, is that they would frame atheism in such a way that they claim they're not making any positive claim, therefore they don't need to provide any evidence, and they then stick it on the other people, the theists, to actually make a positive argument, and then they'll try and challenge it and so on and so forth. So I think from his experience, he's learned the hard way that it's not actually good. Even if you're brilliant at debating, it's still laborious to actually make the positive argument when the other side is not making an argument at all. And the instinctual not argument, the instinct of God is something which we all feel at rock bottom. I think in one of your earlier discussions, you said you don't believe there is such a thing as an atheist, a pure atheist. And I
don't believe in atheism.
Yeah.
So that's a complicated subject nonetheless. But to sum up what you're saying and what he's saying, I believe you can logically argue to God 100%, but you're never as sure, as certain as experiencing the fitra. That's how I always tell people, God didn't leave it to your intellect. You don't have to be a super logician to figure out that God exists. You could be a layman herding sheep and figure out that God exists. And it's not a question of IQ. However, the academics have their path to God. The layman has his path to God. The artist has his path to God. All roads lead to God. There are only two roads. There's nihilism or God. We've talked about this in the past. Ultimately speaking, there are only two possible paths. And we have, as human beings, we have the choice. We have the freedom and choice to do so. However, in my opinion, it's still very legitimate to argue propositionally for God.
Yep. Absolutely. I agree with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the next part of the clip, and I'm going to remove myself from the screen, and I'm going to mute you. And I think that's what's going to solve the audio issue. So if everybody else in the comment section, if you can please let us know if there's any issues, and I'm just going to add him.
With what's highest in some spectacular manner. And so Assalamu alaikum. We are in
That's one of the problems when watching when
contract to buy this 40,000 square feet church complex to make it
you get all these funny ads that turn up. So I'm just waiting for the ad to end. But the clip I'm basically going to play is where Peterson, okay, now it's back. Where Peterson's basically speaking about his concept of a divine spark. And I thought I'd get your thoughts on that, because that's an interesting section. Here we go, 2806. Okay, good.
By insisting upon the presence of God in a kenotic form, right, in an emptied form, in a partially emptied form, in the person of Christ, in a particular place and a particular time. And it's a variant of the prophetic idea, although taken to its absolute extreme. The prophetic idea is that there are people who are marked out in history, marked out by God, by their relationship with what's highest in some spectacular manner. And so I guess one of the things I would say about the Islamic resistance to the idea of the divinity of Christ is that there is an emphasis on Islam on the special status of prophets, of certain prophets, and their particular special relationship with God, which seems to elevate them above other men in some important sense. And so, and drawing a line precisely between that claim and the claim of divinity incarnate is not an easy matter. So, well,
no, I would actually disagree with that. I think there's a clear distinction in the Quran between the prophets and ordinary men. This is actually one of the clearest distinctions. Because
yes, but is there a clear distinction between the prophets and some spark of divinity inside those men?
Yeah. So what do we define as a spark of divinity?
Well, I would say it's partly what gives people charisma, although it's not always that. It's also partly what marked these men out as being prophets. I mean, it's what we look at when we say that man is great. That's a great man. That's a great person. That was a great deed. Well, yes, fair enough. But I would say also embodied virtue. And it's embodied virtue that is in some sense reflective of the action of the highest value operating at a local scale.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we believe. We believe in the doctrine of infallibility, or isma. And so we believe that all prophets basically did the best thing possible for human beings. And this is narrated about the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, the Quran in chapter 68, verse 2, that, and you have impeccable virtue, basically the highest level virtue. And this is something about all the prophets. And obviously, if that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be sufficient guides for us in terms of humanity. So if that's what you mean by a spark of divinity, then I don't think there's a point of resistance.
Yeah, well, these things are hard to sort out, right? The terminology, and that's part of the complexity of these sorts of discussions. And
for us, divinity is basically having the attributes of God. So once again, since we know God through his attributes, from that perspective, that human beings cannot possess the fullness of the attributes of God.
Okay, so I wanted to get your thoughts on how the discussion moved away from what was being discussed earlier in terms of the arguments for God being propositional, whether we should stick to the innateness of God, to a lot of comparison between Islam and Christianity. So before we get into the thick of it here, I wanted your thoughts on the general theme. And you could clearly see that, this is something that was there throughout the discussion, that people afterwards gave feedback as well on this, that there seems to be a lot more ground in terms of the two religions than what was previously supposed. So that commonality between Isa alayhi salam and the Prophet sallam and the other prophets, and then obviously his conception of who the prophets are and who God is different, of course. But I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he was saying. He talked about the divinity incarnate and what makes a human being special. Isn't that spark of divinity? And in Islam, it's very strict. There's we partake no part in divinity. But I don't know what Peterson my question is, what is Peterson exactly saying? Is he saying that we carry within us a part of God? Well, in the Quran, it says, God is closer to you than your jugular veins. We're told that God is closer to you than the air you breathe. When my servants ask you where I am near. Okay, Islam, there's no distance between us and God. Yes, okay, this is what we're taught in Islam, but we partake in no divinity whatsoever. At the same time, we partake in no divinity. So I'm not sure exactly what he was saying. Is he saying that there's we're told we're born with the sign of God, the miracle of God within us, the knowledge of God, We're not divine in any way.
Yeah.
And he did say the divinity incarnated. So that means God became man. God became a flesh. This is a central theme in the gospel. That's what they're trying to say. In the books of Paul, he's saying, look, God became a man. So this is a huge chasm between Islam and Christianity, and Judaism, of course. Jews and Muslims don't agree that God ever became a man. The Jews tell us that in their scripture, it strictly forbids worshiping any type of new God. If somebody brings you a God that your fathers didn't know, you're supposed to kill them. Don't follow any religion other than the ones that are from the Torah. This is what the Jews tell us. Look, our book says you can't follow any other type of God. Nothing. It's this one God. It's Yahweh. It's Hashem. We can't follow any other God, no matter what message you bring us. If it's not this one, if it's not this one God, we don't believe you. Now, Maimonides, the greatest Jewish thinker in history, he said, look, the only other religion that believes in God like we do, without any blemish, is the children of Ishmael, the Muslims.
Yeah.
This is Maimonides. If you ask a Jew scholar, who is the greatest Jew in history, Jewish scholar, if you ask 100 Jewish scholars, who is the greatest Jewish scholar in history, they're all going to say Maimonides.
Yep.
So Jesus was Jewish, and this is our big thing. Are you certain that Jesus worshipped one God? The answer is yes. Are you certain he was Jewish? The answer is yes. We all agree. And there's no dispute. Now, if we ask the Christian scholars, did Jesus claim divinity? Now we have a massive amount of disputes. So the Quran is telling you, look, stay with what you're sure. Like, don't say these things. Don't say three. People who say this, they have great doubt. We're not, your scholars cannot be certain. And this is not us saying, this is not our scholars, their scholars. Christian scholars will tell you, if you ask them, what words exactly did he say? They tell you, we don't know. So why not stay with what's certain? This is what the Quran, in my opinion, when I read the Quran, it's telling you, look, you're sure of this, it's telling the people of the book, look, study your scripture. You're sure of this part. Stay with that. Stay with what you're sure. All the other stuff that you're not sure of, it's never implicit.
Yeah.
Excuse me. It's never explicit. It's always, you have to connect this with that, and you have to make this collage of words.
Yeah.
And Muslims do this too. When they want to prove something, they bring these vague ideas from different type of books, and they connect these dots in a way that's so complex.
Yeah.
And then they build their creed on that. You never build your creed on something doubtful or something dubious or something or something. We don't have a unanimous amount of agreement. Let's agree. Let's come together and agree. Did Jesus believe in one God? Yes. Was he Jewish? Yes. So he believed in the Torah. Okay. What are we sure about? The things we're not sure, leave them alone. Like don't build your theology on it. So when he's saying divinity incarnate, in my opinion, that's again, because even the letters of Paul, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what level we're talking about here, but even the letters of Paul, Christian scholars disagree on which letters are authentic. 7 of them out of the 15 are considered authentic, and they have a variety of reasons why. I'm not a Bible scholar. They have a fascinating amount of reasons why certain letters are not authentic, and even Paul is saying, who corrupted you? Whose letter? Look, this is my sign. I'm giving you my sign. Now you'll know it's from me. Like somebody's sending you fake letters of me, and you're believing in wrong things. You're like, there was for certain scholars tell us, Christian scholars tell us, there were competing Jesus theories early on in the church, and Paul is trying to weed them out and separate them, and he's fighting. And there are fake Pauline letters. And here we are 2,000 years later trying to put it all together. What did he write? What did he mean? Who is he referring to? There's so much uncertainty because even the letters of Paul are Christians, again, not Muslim scholars, not Jewish scholars. Christian scholars tell us, look, we doubt these letters. Why? Here's a word he never used before, and here in this letter he uses it 65 times. And they have a whole list of reasons why it couldn't have been him that penned this letter. Now, I'm not a expert in Paul, but this is what the experts in Paul say. We're sure about these 7. These make sense. These ones over here, we're not sure. So there's so much to put together. There's so much investigation. There's so much textual criticism being done that what are you sure of? At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what are you sure of? And it's a handful of things. And I think we should just be happy of that. And one thing that I think is a major point of friction is, was God incarnated? This is a Christian theme. Now, when we look at the pagans, they had gods incarnate. So we say, look, did this infiltrate into our Abrahamic religions? Are you sure about this? You know, that's where Islam and Judaism critique and close the door. And we say, no, we're never going to let these in. We swore, you know, in the 5 books of Moses, the last book is called Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means like the second time. You're taking the oath for the second time. You're never going to worship anything but this one true God. Nothing in the air, nothing that swims, nothing that crawls on the earth. You will never worship an idol again. You will never worship a worldly thing again. And in Deuteronomy, it's a second, you re-promise it. You take the vow again. That's the last book of Moses. Like, you can't ever forget this. You know, they did the Shema. The Jews would write it down or tape it around their head, like literally bound it to their arm and to their foreheads. You'll never forget this. You swear it. Okay, we took an oath. We swore it. And this is why, like, what we're sure of, we should, you know, I would love to ask Jordan Peterson, how certain are you of these things? You know, because he used the words God incarnate. Now, what does that mean? Are you saying you literally believe God came and walked on the earth? I mean, he just said the 2 words together. Very popular sentence in Christianity.
Yeah.
But I would love to ask him why he believes that and how certain he is about that.
Yeah. And I think you highlighted some very important points. So from our perspective, we can be certain as Muslims on very important core concepts. They're there for everybody to see. Now, there's others, like you mentioned, that try and pluck things from here and there and make up other stuff. But the core stuff is agreed upon by the vast majority of Muslims. But when it comes to Christianity, like you mentioned with the foundations, there's serious questions there. And obviously you get the current dominant form of Christianity, which was one small fragment in the past, and they're very liberal with the way that they describe God as being incarnate, and even the way that he was trying to say a divinity, a spark, you know, and that's obviously a huge difference between Islam and Christianity. You know, we would, like Hijab mentioned in discussion, we would say what is for God in terms of his attributes, and we do not give the creation any attributes like that. But there's also this pragmatist approach that he has, and throughout the discussion, you can see he has it, and near the end, he actually explicitly talks about that pragmatist thing. So it's almost like, and we can find this in his earlier discussions as well, which he had with other thinkers, where he sees the efficacy of the belief in God without necessarily subscribing to the belief in God, right? Mm-hmm. So he's a pragmatist from that perspective, and it's almost like it's irrelevant whether God exists or not. From a pragmatic point of view, it's more like, well, it's very useful to have this belief system. So I'm not saying he definitely doesn't believe in God. He definitely does believe in God. I'm just saying I'm sure you're aware of his pragmatist thoughts. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm very aware that he's described himself as a pragmatist. I've listened to his dialogue on truth. I actually did a reaction video to it. And look, he's saying, look, it's nested in Darwinian principles, his belief in pragmatism.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what I was saying is that if you ask Darwin, why do you believe in these principles, these Darwinian principles named after you, he wouldn't say because it's pragmatic.
Yeah.
He would have said, look, because I observed it in the universe. It corresponds to what I've observed. So that's why I was highlighting, and I have a high respect for Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson. He's a very intelligent man. And I'm sure if somebody goes back and listens to the things I say, I made many of mistakes. I admit them, and I'm always happy when people highlight them to me, especially when they do it in a nice way. And I like to readjust my position when I do make a mistake. I'm not a perfect logician. I'm far from it, and I'm trying to learn. Okay, but he made an error in my opinion here. He says, look, I'm a pragmatist. At least this is how I understood him. He's saying, I'm a pragmatist. Whatever serves life is true. If it doesn't serve life, I will never believe it. It could be correct, but I don't hold it as what he refers to as true. It's a very complex and advanced view, and it's a legitimate view in philosophy. There is a such thing as philosophers who believe in pragmatism. Why should you believe anything else? If it's not useful for me, why should I believe it? What benefit does it bring me? Many people believe in God because it benefits them. They want the afterlife. Right? So he's saying, look, you're all in the same boat. Not necessarily Jordan Peterson, but pragmatists will tell you, look, we all, some pragmatists believe that everybody's really pragmatic. You only believe what benefits you. Yeah. And he's saying, look, I believe in pragmatism and nested in Darwinian principles. So basically, if it's true enough, it should survive. It has to be true enough. It doesn't have to be the complete truth. It's just got to be true enough to serve me. Now, it flies in the face of what we call a correspondence theory. Correspondence theory is we really care to give a statement that corresponds to reality out there in the world. It corresponds to something. It's not just useful to me. I don't tell myself that my neighbor is friendly to me and turn the blind eye when he does something evil, because in my mind, I have to have a friendly neighbor to survive. No, I'm a realist. If my neighbor is friendly, I want to see him for who he is. You know, there's a prayer the Prophet used to always say, God, show me how things truly are. Because we all add our biases to it. We all want to see what pleases us in the world. Very few of us see the world as it truly is. You know, you have to strip your bias. You have to strip your bias. Part of becoming an objective thinker is to be aware of your bias. You know, this was what made Socrates so famous. Socrates said, know thyself. How could you know the world if you don't know yourself first? He believed in first understanding the human mind, how it works, and then studying the world. Because the Greeks before Socrates, the pre-Socratics, they were studying the world. What is the world made of? Substance theory. What is the world? How does the world work? What is it made of? How does it function? And Socrates said, no, stop all that. You're starting at the wrong end. First, start internally. Understand yourself. Then understand how you think, your biases, etc. Then go search into the world. You know, in the Quran, it says the same thing. It says, study the dunya and your inner self. This dualism, okay? We have to study both. But if you're a pragmatist, if you're a pragmatist and you're modeling your pragmatism on Darwinism, well, Darwin was not a pragmatist per se. Darwin is saying, look, I'm telling you these things, these Darwinian principles here. I'm writing them down. I'm writing you this book because I believe it corresponds to how the world works. It's correspondence theory. Darwin was not trying to say something that's going to advance his particular race. Now, some people argue that, of course, and it might be partially true. For certain, he had biases. No man is perfectly no thinker is perfect when it comes to correspondence theory. We all have our biases. We have to be aware of them. So Darwin had his biases for certain, no doubt. He would admit that. But he wasn't a pragmatist. He was working on correspondence theory. This is the issue, because in Islam, we are correspondence theorists. You know, God is telling you this is how the world is. This is the reality around you, whether you like it or not. And where it seems like Peterson is telling us, look, because one time a woman asked him in an interview, do you believe in God? And his answer was, I act like I believe in God.
Interesting.
Which I found a very fascinating answer, because I said to myself then, okay, he's a pragmatist. Believing in God will allow him to, you know, stay sober, be good to his wife, be friendly to his neighbor. He's going to have, all in all, a more successful life. And it's true. I mean, who conquered the West? It was Christianity. Christianity was wildly successful. Islam was wildly successful, is wildly successful. Yeah. They're the fastest growing groups in the world. And why is that? Because people hold to these virtues and principles, and it makes their nuclear family very strong, very successful. You know, like, say what you say about different groups. The groups that are propagating their culture faster than everybody else are the Christians and the Muslims. You know, of course, there are other groups as well. But these are the two fastest growing groups, and Islam even more so. So they're highly successful. Now, that for me it's the facade of being a believer. I don't find that to be a true believer, and this is explicit in the Quran. Islam calls them hypocrites. You say you believe, but you don't really believe. It's better to say, look, I don't believe. I don't want to be at war with anybody, but I just don't believe it. I'm not convinced. Than to say I believe and not really believe. Why lie? Why be a hypocrite? So I think that religion is useful. Yes, definitely. Religion is useful. However, that's not why you should be a believer, in my opinion. Those are benefits, yes. But truly, if you're an authentic believer, listen, do you pray when there's nobody around? When you're like, or do you only pray in the congregation? Do you only like that? It's a good evidence that you're maybe not truly believing in God. You know, do you reflect upon God, or is it a non-topic until you see somebody else in your congregation, and then you're kind of like, you know, you're just you're part of a cultic system. I would like to directly ask that to Jordan Peterson. Like, do you actually pray to God when nobody's around? Do you talk about religion, or do you contemplate religion other than wanting to sell books? The selling books, is that why you study religion? Because there's a demand for it? Or are you really, do you believe there's actually, the world corresponds in a way that you're a human being and there's a God literally out there, or there's a God literally in existence, I should say, and this is of consequence to us in the next life? Or is it just profit and loss in this world? That's a question I would love to ask him, because he strikes me as a genuine person that will give me an honest answer.
Absolutely. And I think, Firas, you hit upon a very interesting comparison between Darwin's correspondence theory, from which he proposed the mechanism of natural selection, which Peterson is using to actually anchor his pragmatist view, which obviously is against the correspondence theory. And then obviously you gave the examples of, well, is he studying religion, or is he doing these things for pragmatic purposes? But then the other question I guess we can ask is, if he is a true pragmatist, and a true pragmatist would have to find the best possible way of living a life which is going to give him the most meaning and happiness and value, well, why is it an Abrahamic faith? Why isn't it humanism? Because humanism, again, has its own principles. And just like, for example, in Christianity, we have certain principles, and those, from a pragmatic point of view, you can pretend are ontological realities. You could do the same with a humanist perspective. So why did he stop at Christianity rather than anything else? And shouldn't that be something for him to consider, about maybe there's something beyond the pragmatism here? There is truth behind these worldviews, which is why they have efficiency. Now, of course, we're not saying all of Christianity is true, but I hope you're getting my point about why it's almost arbitrary why he went to Christianity and nothing
that would be an interesting question to ask him. Why stop at Christianity? Why say God incarnate? Why do you believe that? Like, we want to know that part. Why don't you believe in God without that part? Because that's a historical claim. That's something you're saying now, that something happened 2,000 years ago in a time and a place, and you believe in it. And when I ask you why do you believe in that? It would be interesting to ask him directly, because he's a very intelligent guy. I'm sure he's thought of these things. But if you declare that you're just a humanist, you wouldn't have to argue for something that happened 2,000 years ago in a particular time and place. You could say, and he might say something like, I've heard a little bit of quite a bit of him talking. He's a very intelligent guy. He might say, look, it could be metaphorically true, not necessarily literally true. Like, for instance, I'll tell you what the way he described it. I heard him describe it once. He said, look, the story of the crucifixion is about the worst thing happening to the best person. And it's actually very interesting, his position. He's saying, look, whether it happened or not, bad things happen to really good people. Who can explain this? Now, the way the Bible frames it is that, look, the worst thing happened to the best person for everybody, for humanity.
Yeah.
And that this thing happens so that all your sins are forgiven. And, they have a narrative that goes with it. I wonder, does Jordan Peterson share in that narrative? Because the narrative he gives is that, look, this is the Bible's way trying to explain why sometimes really, really good people are going to suffer very, very bad consequences or fates in life. And we have to come to terms with it. But the Bible's narrative seems to be very different than what he was saying. Like, where does he take it from there? Okay, so something horrible happened to a good person, whether it be Jesus or your next door neighbor. She's a very sweet woman and she gets run over by a car. She was in the hospital for 8 hours, suffering horribly. She's never harmed a person. She's never said a bad word. She's the most friendly person in the neighborhood. Why did she have to why did she have to suffer so many hours before she eventually succumbed to her wounds and dies? That's what human beings have to grapple with all the time. We see this kind of thing all the time. Where does he take it from there? Because the Bible's general narrative is very different. It's like, hey, okay, something bad happened to somebody very good, but here's why. It doesn't explain why that lady now got hit by a car and died. So he's saying, look, I've heard Peterson ask, what's more true? A truth that is metaphorically true, or something that corresponds in reality? I think they're both true. He's right. There are things that are metaphorically true. There's no doubt. I mean, Ghazali spoke about this for certain. There are things that are metaphorically true. There are things that are correspondingly true. And we have to acknowledge that they both have a value of truth.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I hold the story of Little Red Riding Hood to be true. Now, I don't think it's literally true, but I think it's a story to teach young girls, don't trust men. Men will say anything to get you into bed. That's what the story is. When this is, it makes total sense to me. Little Red Riding Hood. And men will tell you they're going to help you in every which way. Oh, they're going to make life better for you. They're really just trying to get you into bed. They're wolves. Now, I think Peterson leans on that more. So, do Christians consider him a literal Christian? Because if you ask the Pope what's a Christian, he's going to say, if you ask St. Paul, what's a Christian, he says, look, you believe Jesus died and rose literally, because if he didn't, our faith is in vain. Like, that's something I would ask Peterson. I'd say, how can you say that? Because I'm assuming he would lean to the metaphorical truths. But the Bible, Paul at least, is telling you, look, if you don't believe it, if Jesus literally didn't die and he didn't literally come back to life, so he literally has the keys to life and death. If this is not the case, Paul is saying in the Bible, everybody knows this. Everybody who studied Christianity knows this. Paul says, if it didn't happen, literally, our faith is in vain. All your praying, all your kneeling, all your going to church, it's for nothing. How does Peterson deal with that? Is he saying, look, is he a higher authority in Christianity than Paul? Is he a different sect than Paul? Like, these are questions I would love to ask him, because it brings the literalism of Christianity, because you can't take that, in my opinion, I don't know how you could take that figuratively, what Paul is saying. Jesus literally died, born, raised, and then died for 3 days and came back to life. How could you say that's figurative? Paul is literally saying, if this didn't happen, we're done. It's over. Yeah. So I don't think Christians take that figuratively, to be honest with you. I don't think any Christians take that figuratively. So where's he going with this? Is he trying to bring us like a neo-Christianity, a new way of thinking about Christianity? I don't know if he's I'm uncertain about it. I'm uncertain of what his position is.
Yeah. I mean, one way of thinking about it is perhaps some liberal Christians have lowered the threshold so much that they're willing to basically accept someone like Peterson as a cultural Christian. And, we have this sort of problem, especially in Europe. We have it less so in across the pond in America. But, for example, we'll have the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest authority in England, in the Church of England, basically saying that, he sometimes doubts God. And that's supposed to be some way of getting closer to the liberals and the atheists and the other people who are skeptical. But, as Muslims, we would never do that. We would actually be very certain in our faith, and we would not try and, pander to popular notions, whether it's liberalism, feminism, or skepticism, or Darwinism, or scientism. We would not want to actually attract those type of people. We would actually want to challenge those people and say to them, no, actually, what you're doing is you're giving a representation of reality that doesn't match what reality is, and Islam is the truth, and so on and so forth. We'll have that sort of certainty. And I think this is also why perhaps later on in the discussion, Hijab said to him, look, you want to fight, the postmodernists, you want to fight, the constructivists, the people who are, your main if you like, opponents, but you cannot fully tackle them from your perspective. And Islam is a far greater system to actually challenge these ideologies than your pragmatist view. I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like the postmodernists, everything is up for questioning, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So nothing is sacred. That's where I draw the line. I said that's because they trust in their intellect way too much. They don't have a position of humility. They don't come from a position of humility. True knowledge is to know the extent of your ignorance.
Yeah.
They think that because they can strike a doubt into everything, that everything must be untrue. Everything is relative. And now you have even like people in religious circles who are very high up, succumbing to that.
Yeah.
And it's true only, they're correct only if there's no God. But if you believe in God, then objective truth exists. Objective truth exists. This is the old Euthyphrian dilemma. Does God love something because it's it's good, or is it good because God loved it?
Yeah.
Either way, if God says something is good, that's it. It's over. Like, for instance, let's say God was on the witness stand. You wouldn't have to ask him for evidence. Everything he would say would be true by default. Because by definition, God cannot say something or do something wrong. It doesn't need to be cross-examined. So if you believe in God, there's objectivity in the world. If we're all atheists, there is no objectivity in the world. To us, your word is as good as mine. Your ideas are just as good as mine. Everything is. So when he's saying he's Christian, he's got to have some level of objectivity, and he's got to know something via intuition. He's got to draw the line somewhere. And those postmodernists are going to challenge your line where you draw it, and that's fine. They can have their. And the Quran tells you they have their way, we have ours. They have their religion, and we have ours. They have their. They're never going to believe what we believe. We'll never believe what they believe, and that's fine. We can coexist peacefully. You live by the consequences of what you believe. We'll live by the consequences of what we believe. And you believe what you want, and that's it. We go our own ways. It's live and let live, and that's fine. I'm okay with disagreement. I have no problem with disagreement. I don't toss and turn at night because somebody out there disagrees with me. I'm fine, perfectly fine with that. I'm totally honest. So I think Peterson should take a stand. If he believes in God, he should say, look, I literally believe in God, or I figuratively believe in God, or God to me is a metaphor. Say it. Just say it. Where do you stand? Because in my opinion, the Bible literally believes in God. You can't come back now 2,000 years later and tell us, oh, it's figurative. It's a figurative thing. No, I can't tell you that Christians, they suffered all those years under Roman rule and they fought for their beliefs. They thought it was figurative. No. They thought it was literal. Paul thought it was literal. We think it's literal. We all take it to be true. There's a consequence for believing or not believing. There's an afterlife. This is all true to us in our minds. If you take it as metaphor, make it known. Make it known. But I find that the postmodernists will accept you if you take it as metaphor. If you take it as literally true, they're going to disagree with you, and that's fine. Let them disagree with us. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very interesting section I wanted to play. It's related to exactly what we were just discussing now. And as you know, you've said several times about his lack of commitment to any form of claim which would fit in line with the Correspondence view. And when hijab is giving the certainty of the traditionalist Muslim perspective, you find him pushing back because he doesn't like anything which is absolutist. He doesn't like anything that sounds like it could slip off into some form of authoritarian type of government or some sort of overarching authority on human beings to stop their individual freedom. So I'm just going to play that section.
Into chaos and anarchy and depression. And that's not something I'm willing.
There's twin temptations that might be, what would you say, specific to given temperaments. And I was asking you personally, like you're a traditionalist believer.
Yeah.
How do you protect yourself, your soul against the temptations of overweening certainty?
All right, I got you.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, no, I don't. In terms of certainty, I strive for it. In fact, we want it. We don't want to. The problem is not.
How do you rectify error? Like, you're not perfect, obviously.
No. Me personally, of course, I'm not perfect, but we believe we follow a perfect guidance.
Right,
Maybe
but you follow it imperfectly.
Yes,
right?
I am.
And there's the rub. Right.
Yeah.
So that's my point, is that given that you have to follow it imperfectly, given that you're imperfect, how do you defend yourself against inappropriate certainty? Because look, if you're imperfect, it means you think you're right about things you're not right about. That's the definition of imperfect.
Compounded ignorance, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there are things that in terms of my own personal, you're talking about my own personal faith. So
I'm talking, you bet.
Right. Okay, I got you. There are certain things which I will believe in 100%. And there are certain things I will suspend judgment on. So the things which, for me, constitute the anchor. I believe the moment I take that anchor away, I plunge into chaos and anarchy and depression. And that's not something I'm willing to do for myself. So the certainty I have is that there's one God worthy of worship, that God's wisdom and guidance is the truth, that whatever God says is true, that the prophets are true, that heaven is true, that hell is true, all that stuff. The things I will suspend judgment on is how to deal with situations, because that, I do believe, by the way, in a kind of Sharia consequentialism. And I do believe that within the Islamic framework is something called usul al-fiqh, which is basically the principles of jurisprudence, that rules are not always going to work in all cases. We do believe that, by the way. So for example, I'm not allowed to drink alcohol, but in certain cases, if it's the last thing that one can do if they're not going to die, if they're going to die if they don't do it, then you can do it. And this is just one like extreme example. We're not allowed alcohol in Islam, obviously. This is one of the injunctions. But there are things we do believe in a consequential and inbuilt flexibility. With that, we have to communicate, we have to discuss, we have to speak to Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
Okay.
So
I'm still not getting at what I want to hear from you specifically.
Yes. Go on.
You know that, well, all of us struggle with the desire to have what we believe be right at all costs, right? Because it is satisfying, and it's difficult to be wrong because it means you have to improve. You have to look at your errors. I'm asking you personally, like when you're dealing with your wife, when you're dealing with your kids, how do you know how is it that you can protect yourself against being overweening?
Now, this is a good question. You're going to get me in trouble with this kind of thing right now, And this is a good question. What it is that, I've been married for like 9 years now, and I've had to learn that the hard way. That I protect myself by realizing or know my own vulnerability, my own fallibility, my own weakness, the fact that I don't get everything right. The fact that there's another perspective, that there's something outside of myself which is greater than me.
Yeah, well, that's okay. So that's something like, because a serious discussion can be had about the relationship between humility and love, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a certain degree of humility is a precondition for love, because otherwise you can't take the perspective of the other person. Like, how can you, if you don't think you're wrong? And for me, and it's certainly been the case, this was useful in my clinical practice and certainly in my marriage, is I'm trying to be as attentive as I can to when I'm wrong. And that seems to be a reasonable move
that comes
forward,
out, and I think that's really good. That's a good part of your person. I think that's why a lot of people actually love your work and love you as a person, because you come across as extremely authentic and sincere. That
I agree with Hijab. Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he comes off as sincere and authentic, and that's why I really enjoyed this podcast. I think he has empathy. I don't think he's trying to clickbait us or trying to create a dramatic video and just say cherry pick any bad thing he can find to sensationalize an argument and try to exploit the Google algorithm or YouTube algorithm. No, he's literally listening. He wants to know. He wants to understand. He wants to see, can we get along? Can we be friends? And that's worth more than, the YouTube algorithm or what you want to call.
Absolutely.
He's generally giving an authentic chance for us to get along, and I respect him incredibly for it. Now, Mohammed Hijab said something very interesting. He said, look, there are exceptions to the rules, sort of. Like in the Quran, it says the Quran never changes, like Allah's way never changes. Then it says Allah, he replaces an ayat with a better one, equally as good or better. Which one is it? Well, the principles of Islam never change. The day-to-day application of the law, we have to adapt it to what makes sense in our time. So it has to make sense. What context was it? The Quran put us on a path, in a direction. It didn't cement us in the 7th century. Some people think, oh no, it has to be done this way because that's how they did it in the 7th century. Mm-hmm. Well, dressing like a 7th century Arab wasn't a normal thing to do in the 7th century. Today, do you have to dress like a 7th century Arab? You're not in the 7th century anymore. I don't think it's wrong, but I don't think it's mandatory. The principles of Islam must always remain true. The day-to-day laws must be adapted to our time and situation. And there's plenty of examples of this in the life of the Prophet. Like, for instance, The Treaty of Hudaybiyah was a secular document. You know, Ali radiallahu anhu, he wrote the Prophet of God, and they objected to it. No, we don't think he's the Prophet of God.
Yeah.
Oh, strike it. The Prophet himself struck it with his own hand. He put an X on it. He said, strike it out. Make it a secular document. We're not dealing with Muslims. This is not a contract with Muslims. This is a non-Muslim people. Accommodate them. When they send a message to the Romans require a stamp, a wax stamp. Make one. That's what they accept, that we make one. This is not our way. It's not the Islamic way. It's their way. Accommodate them. There's so many plentiful examples. And it's really correct what he said. So Peterson's asking me, how do you know when you're wrong? Look, in the Quran, it's very clear. Only God understands the Quran. Only God. This is what I would have said if I was Mohammed Hijab. I would have said, look, we're never right. It's only our intention that counts. So for instance, if I do something and I thought in my heart of hearts that it was the right thing to do, because the central theme of Islam, the central theme of the Quran is justice.
Yeah.
If you read the Quran and you study carefully, the central theme of the Quran is there are core themes, but the central overwhelming theme is justice. 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 At the end, you can trust God to be fair. Nobody is going to be treated unjustly. Nobody. You're going to get what you deserve. Now, in your heart of hearts, if you did the just thing, you don't have to worry about anything. If the level of logic you had, the level of understanding you had, and you still came up, you tried your best, and you still came to the wrong answer, you did something technically wrong, you're absolved, as long as your heart and in your heart, you're aiming to do the right thing. Because the Quran is clear. Nobody understands the Quran. Nobody truly understands the Quran except God. And at the end, it's the intention that counts. So that's how we protect ourselves from making errors. Because we say, inshallah, Allahu alam, God knows best. I'm hoping I'm in the correct way. I'm hoping my heart is in the right place. I'm hoping when I gave that charity, I did it for the right reasons. I didn't do it to, make myself feel good or show off or whatnot. I didn't do it to stroke my own ego. I did it because I gave from something I really like, because I was thinking for the sake of Allah. I was doing it for the sake of God. I'm hoping my intentions are accepted. I never know, or I'm never certain of myself. This is how I would have answered Peterson's question.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way of explaining it. In essence, what Peterson misunderstood, in which Hijab tried to clarify, is it's not the case that we take the belief in our belief that the Quran is certainly the word of God, that the messengers are certainly true, that heaven, hell is certainly true, that we take that certainty, the certainty from the Quran, the certainty from the prophets who obviously understood the true message of Islam, and then we pass it on to a human authority, we pass it on to a pope, we pass it on to people in our community who then wear that garb, and then they act like they are perfect. So that's the mistake that he's making there, because like you rightly said, we believe in God, we believe in God's messengers, we believe in the Quran, but then when it comes to human beings who are there to try and interpret the Quran, understand the Quran, apply it to their context, then of course you can make mistakes. You're never going to be perfect. I mean, why else would we have in Islam the idea of a just judge who comes to the wrong conclusion, but he's still rewarded for it because he had the right intention? People can make mistakes. But I also wanted your thoughts on, you can feel that Dr. Peterson does not like certainty, and he did not like when there was a lot of, if you like, from Hijab's perspective. I'm saying not like not in a way that he was upset, but in a way that he wanted to push back on it. His certainty when it came to the Islamic paradigm, because when someone pushes him back, like you alluded to earlier, he would not say, yes, I believe that. He would say, well, I pretend that like that is true. I pretend like it's true that there is a God. So he doesn't like certainty. What are your thoughts on this? Because this is in a way his critics and his opponents, the skeptics, this is their narrative. They don't like that certainty as well.
You know what? It comes back to, it's strange. I always have to come back to Ghazali. Look, the one thing I'm sure of, I'm only sure of one thing. I'm sure of La ilaha illallah. That's it. This I'm certain of. I know that via direct experience. Period. The death of all paradigms. There's only one way to state it. If all paradigms die, if all your paradigms were to die, you would be left in the state of the shahada. That's it. There's nothing left. You can't eliminate any further. You can't doubt any further. Doubt now becomes proof. You've reached the point of you can't question no further. You can't. There's no other rock to look under. This is the last point. Human beings, we come to a position where we scrutinize our beliefs so much. Philosophers, theologians, you scrutinize your beliefs so much that you get to the point where you realize there's a point of awareness, and then you strike out there's a point, because that's just presupposition, and then you have the state of awareness, and the perfect way to describe it is La ilaha illallah. I am certain of this. People think that there's this cloud behind their eyes, that this consciousness is trapped inside this flesh. No. It's the opposite. Your flesh, this thing you call flesh, this body, is trapped in this consciousness, in this point of awareness. It's the other way around. It's the other way around. If you read Al-Ashari, if you read Understand Ghazali, he's telling you, no, it's the other way around. It's not consciousness in a meat puppet. It's a meat puppet in consciousness, and that meat puppet is not. It's not a meat puppet as you would think.
I like
It's
that.
not. It's the other way around. And if you kill every single idol, if you see through every single idol, everything with a blemish of doubt has to go. You end up with nothing left but La ilaha illallah. You end up with this, and this is where we start from. This is where you start from. When you become Muslim, what do we ask you to say? We ask you to take the shahada. We start from here. This we're certain of. Descartes, if you read the Meditations, he's like, look, I'm going to throw away all my math, all my history, all my science, all my geometry. And he was a mathematical genius, of course, a scientific genius. He said, I'm going to start from something so certain I cannot doubt. And he came with the cogito. This was exactly, he did this 600 years after Ghazali. This is exactly what Ghazali did. He's like, look, where's the starting point? This thing I can't doubt, and I can build everything upon it. And Ghazali realizes the meaning of La ilaha illallah. He realizes that it's the death of all paradigms. It's the death of everything with a possible blemish. You can't doubt no more. Doubt now becomes a proof. Okay, now this is a very special position to find yourself in. You really have to go on that journey of cross-examining everything in existence. So if we're talking at that level, I agree with Peterson. We can only trust in one thing, God. We're certain, because we know that intuitively. Everything else we know, we believe, we have faith in, because there's a difference between knowledge and belief. There's knowledge, and then there's high probability, certain beliefs, very strong beliefs, very adamant beliefs, things that I'm very certain of. But I'm never knowing them in the same way I know the shahada. The shahada is direct. It is known. You couldn't convince me otherwise. I don't care how many scientific experiments you come up with. I don't care how many books Dawkins writes. I don't care what you say. It's not a logical. I didn't know it purely logically. I knew it via firsthand experience. So barring that, I know nothing. I only know one thing. Everything else, I have a strong faith. That includes geometry, science, physics, history, all of that, all of it. I have a strong faith. I use the word know figuratively, but I only really know, capital K here, one thing. Everything else, because when the Quran says وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, God is one in a particular way. He exists in a particular way. He's unique in a particular way. Nothing else is like him. And what does this mean? If you understand Ghazali, he's telling you, look, he is known without blemish. Everything else is known with a blemish, via concept, like human beings are part flesh, part concept. We're part, ship of thesis. We're part theory. We're part concept. We're part paradigm. It's a very long discussion to have, but when they will talk about it, there's a type of dualism to humans. There's a type of dualism. Mm-hmm. There are parts to human beings. God is particular, singular, unblemished, knowable in one way only. Knowable. He's in one category by himself, knowable without blemish. So this is a gift from God. If you understand Ghazali, you would understand what I'm saying right now. Everything else, we believe. Yes, we believe. But the Quran tells you, it says in the Quran, it says, you don't know about Noah, the story of Noah. God had to inform you about the story of Noah. We take that with the story of Noah we believe it, we take it upon authority. The Quran says it, we take it by authority. I didn't witness the story of Noah. You didn't witness the story of Noah. The Quran is telling us that. The Quran is telling us, look, you wouldn't have known these things if we didn't inform you. You would not know. Our faith is not based on something that happened in the past. Those were miracles for the people of Noah. We just say, look, we're from the same chain. Yes, we believe in him. We have a faith that is true. We believe in it's true. And tomorrow we might find scientific evidence for it to be totally true. And it might increase our faith. But we don't know that like we know God. God is known directly. It's known intuitively. It's called innatism. We know when we hear the Quran, Ibn Tufal wrote this beautifully. He's explained that Islam is a natural religion that you're born with, and it's a real revealed religion. They're parallel to one another. The Quran is the reminder, and this is why the Quran calls itself the reminder. The Quran calls himself the reminder, reminding you of what? The religion you already know. And it's a pure religion. It's not mixed with anything from the dunya. We don't add to it. We don't subtract. It just is. And this is the only thing we should be putting in a special category. Let's call it that, a special category, and it's unique in this sense. I tell people, look, I believe in morality. For me, morality is without doubt. So you can say your postmodernist can tell me that right and wrong is relative. I'm going to disagree with him, and it's okay that I disagree with him. And it's okay he disagrees with me. That's he let him live his consequences. I'm going to live my consequences. I'm not scared for him. He's not scared for me. The Quran says to the Prophet, don't fall over because they don't accept your message. Don't be distressed. Don't be in distress, because just convey the message and that's it. Tell people what you believe. Here's why I believe it. If we have a difference of opinion, that's you, that's me. You accept your consequences for your beliefs, your lifestyle. I accept the consequences for my belief and my lifestyle, and let live, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you mentioned about morality also being something that we believe in, absolutely, because when it comes to these postmodernist sort of perspectives, they still have to eventually come back to something sacred, something which is going to be unchallengeable, something axiomatic. And for us, we start off with something that we know beyond propositional evidence, which is tawhid, which is la ilaha illallah, which is the very foundation of our worldview. And you mentioned earlier about the merits of the Quran. So this is actually a very good segue to play the next part, which I wanted to play, which is when Hijab simply asked him if he could recite some Quran to him, which I thought was a wonderful way of actually sharing the Islamic perspective. So I'm just going to mute you, remove myself, and then hopefully the sound should be working. Everyone else in the comment section, please let me know if there's any audio issues, and then I'll try and fix that.
How are they knowable? Is that only through relationship with the book, or does that also have an experiential element as far as you're concerned?
So what I can do, in fact, is I can recite for you a couple of verses from the Quran, because what we believe is they are known through the revelation. And I can recite for you maybe 10, 20-second verses and translate for you and show you what I think it will give you more of a flavor of what we believe.
Sure. Do what you will.
So the Quran states in the end of chapter 59, هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. So let me read the translation from because I don't want to get this wrong, right? These two verses I think are probably the two best verses that answer your question in the Quran. Allah is He. I'm going to get something maybe a bit better. Translation. All right. He is Allah. that there is no God worthy of worship except for him, the King, the Holy, the one free from all defects, the giver of security, the watcher over his creatures, the mighty, the compeller, the supreme. Glory be to him. Glory be to God. High is he above all that they associate as partners with him. He is Allah, the creator, the inventor of all things, the bestower of forms. To him belong the best names. All that is in the heavens and the earth glorify him, and he is the Almighty, the All-Wise. So these are, I would say, potentially the two best verses that summarize for us.
So it's an attempt to use a multiplicity of virtues to define a supreme source of good.
So on this point, one thing which I think most people felt throughout the discussion is that hijab wasn't pulling back in terms of the evangelical nature of Islam. That Islam is a religion that is there to show that it is a superior way of life than the way of life that others subscribe to, including what Peterson currently holds on to. So that type of evangelism is usually something which, from a Western perspective, is seen as negative, but hijab put a very clear positive spin on it. And actually, later on, when they're having a discussion about why he even recited, he made it clear that, look, we're basically here to share the message of Islam with you. But what
I think Muhammad, honestly, he did a great job. And I think both men did a great job of opening it up and being honest and genuine. It was a beautiful thing. But I think the Quran is saying something very unique here. Look, whatever you love in the dunya, whatever you love in this world, if you make it the focal point of your life, I don't care what it is. If you love money and you make money the focal point, eventually you're separated from money. If you're married your wife and you have this wonderful relationship and that's the focal point of your wife, you'll one day die. She'll one day get a disease. There's going to be a separation sooner or later. The world, anything you love in this world will eventually let you down. Look at the attributes God is explaining to you. He's one. He gives the best forms. He's eternal. You can rely on God no matter what. All this comes from the number one spot in your life. Everybody has a slot where the number one. This is number one in my life. If you put anything other than God there, it's going to be to your detriment. You're going to have a collapse. You cannot base your life on something that is limited, shaky, temporary, because you're always going to have this inevitable downfall. Imagine you build a building and the first foundational block is something pivotal or something that's going to decay, something that's temporary. You build this beautiful edifice, you build this beautiful building, and all of a sudden, one little crack, everything comes crumbling down. God is telling you, look, I'm perfect. I'm worthy of your worship. I'm worthy of being number one. What else is there? There's no competition. Don't take anything in this world. Don't partner it with me. People love war. They worship the God of war. They took war and God, and they mixed that idea together, and they made a partner with God. That's why we say in Judaism and Islam, to take a human being and say, I'm God, you're taking yourself a height of arrogance. From our perspective, it's the height of arrogance. The Japanese, they draw Jesus as Japanese. The Scandinavians, they draw him blonde hair, blue eyed. You're mixing the most perfect, most important thing with something of the dunya. At least this is how we see it. Don't take anything other than God as number one in your life. It won't matter to you after. Your car breaks down, it doesn't matter. Number one is still there. Your wife leaves you, it doesn't matter. Number one is still there. As long as number one is there, everything else will fall in line. You can never hit me at the core. I'm unbeatable to you. I'm invincible to you. Tomorrow the doctor diagnoses me with cancer. I wasn't in love with the body anyway. The body wasn't number one. Some people, especially nowadays with social media, their body's everything. Yeah. They won't eat a morsel of fat. They're doing 100 million sit-ups. Why? Because they're living so much through the body. But guess what? It's a never-ending battle. You're trying to bail water out of the ship, but the ship is sinking, and and I know. It's a matter of time before the ship sinks. What's going to happen when you've passed your prime and your body starts to wrinkle and whatnot? You're gonna start to have a psychological collapse.
Yeah.
The number one thing in your life should never be anything other than God. This is what the Quran is telling you. Like, and it's for your benefit. Allah doesn't need. God says in the Quran, Allah, it says He doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need us. Like, God is not begging you for worship here. If you want to be the most powerful, most successful human being, you should genuinely speaking, not for that practical reason, put God first. Once you put God first, your problems will become secondary. All your problems that you think are so important will become secondary. Like, there's a great hadith which I really love, and it's the Prophet. He tells the kids, he tells them to chase the sun, like run towards the sun, and they run. Excuse me. He tells them to chase their shadows first. They chase their shadows, they can't catch it. They come back, we couldn't catch our shadow. He says, now run towards the sun. When they run towards the sun, the shadow is chasing them. Meaning, when you run towards the sun, you're running towards God. The dunya chases you now. You're not chasing the dunya. The dunya you don't have enough time. The dunya always wants your attention now. Why? It's not number one. This is what the central theme of Islam is. You put God first. Your problems are going to take a back seat. This is the story of Abraham. Why is Abraham willing to sacrifice his son for God? Because God is number one. The son is secondary. So I think this would have been a very powerful element of the Quran to highlight to Jordan Peterson, because I think he could see a lot of value in this. There's a lot of value in this idea in the Quran. It's a very powerful idea in the Quran, because if you look at Muslims, like mentally speaking, Muslims are very strong, very, very strong. It's I would say their strongest quality. The Muslims as a whole, they're incredibly mentally strong. It's very hard to make them, for us, like, I don't know, like certain problems that are common in other cultures, to us, they're almost non-existent, and I don't want to criticize anybody, but it has to do with that. You're taught from a young age to put God as number one, and God is the firmest handhold, and God will never let you down, and this relationship will never break unless you do something. Unless you break it. God is always there. He's always forgiving you. When you make a mistake, He's always there. It's this perfect relationship that only you can mess up. It's never going to betray you, this relationship. And this is a very powerful component in Islam. Extremely powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember not too long ago, just maybe a few days ago, you put up, without getting into the details of it, because that'll be a bit of a distraction, but you put up something online. I think it was some magazine or something that was interviewing you, and you said something along the lines of, we don't need this postmodern nonsense to be taught to our kids. This stuff which destroys our masculinity, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was.
My words were taken out of context, but I like to elaborate on that actually.
Okay. Go ahead.
Like, here's the thing. Are we teaching ideologies in school? If we are, we should teach all of them. LGBTQ is another ideology. That's their business. Me, I don't care. If you want to be queer, gay, lesbian, whatever it is, I'm not an expert in this field. I don't even know what all those letters mean, to be honest with you. If you ask me to define them, I probably will get them wrong. Unfortunately, I can't define them perfectly. But that's your ideology. Now they were promoting it to my children. Now, if I walked into an American school, I'm a Canadian, we're socialists here, and I walk up to the children and I start telling them about the wonders of socialism or whatnot, people might get upset at me. They may say, hey, look, here we're capitalists. If you want to talk socialism, come talk to us.
Yeah.
And we'll decide if we want to expose our kids to this ideology. My children, for me, okay, because here's the thing, how do you define masculinity? Masculinity is a subjective term. If you look up the word masculinity, it's going to say, to exhibit masculine traits. What does that mean? You have to define it. And I did define it. In my interview, I defined masculinity. And the way I define masculinity, not everybody's going to define it the same way. Attracted to the opposite sex. That's how I define it. It's not an objective. Because for me, the norm, and I'm using that word in a literal sense, men, by the norm, will be attracted to women. I want to give my sons every opportunity to be conditioned to be heterosexual. And why? Because I put the nuclear family first. For me, my family is ahead of my personal needs and the personal needs of my children. The family as a whole, this is how I operate. The needs of the many, the family, is supersedes that of the individual. Whereas in the West, it's the total opposite nowadays. The Christian Europeans were very, similar to what we are now, to where I am now. But today, the popular thing is, I live my life what makes me happy. And you hear that all the time. If it makes you happy, if you're happy that way, that's good for you. They're not so interested about the collective as a whole. They're living more of an individual life. And that's their business if they want to live that way. Me, I believe that somebody could be naturally gay, or you can nurture them to be gay. And there's ample evidence of this. Okay, and if you don't think that you could be nurtured to be gay, you should study history, because the Spartans were gay, the Greeks were gay, the Romans were gay, and it was a cultural issue as well. Because when the Romans converted to Christianity, well, that's another topic. Basically, take a look, for instance, the Spartans. It was mandatory to be gay. It was mandatory. No, that's not what it is today. But what I'm trying to say is, you can make it normal for somebody. You can condition somebody at a young age. And they were conditioning my children who are prepubescent. And I was just telling people, look, I would like to keep that out of school. Teach my kids math, science, history, logic, and leave the ideologies off the table, because we live in a secular state. I live in a secular state. My understanding with the school is they're going to teach my kids math, science, history, teach not to discriminate, but they're not going to put ideologies in their head. Like, I don't go teach their children Islam. I don't go and sit without their parents' permission and say, look, let me tell you about the wonders of Islam. No, they wouldn't like that. They would say, hey, wait a second, that's ideology. Wait a second, you're a math professor. You're supposed to teach math today. Okay? Yeah. If we can't teach our ideology, you shouldn't teach yours. Nobody should teach theirs. Now, my kids also have a religion class where they teach the major religions, and I'm fine with that. I have no problem with that. My thing is that, look, you're bypassing the parent, and you're teaching the children ethics from a particular ideology without our permission. And I got many, many parents reaching out to me, telling me they agree with me. I would say, look, like 80% of the messages I've been getting are positive. Oh, thank you. Tell them no, because the same thing's happening in my school. Same thing's happening with my kids. They keep encouraging our kids to be a certain way. For me, I put a high premium on my progeny. I don't want anybody messing with it. I tell my sons, hey, you're hetero. By the way, you're hetero. I'm hetero. My father was hetero. We're all hetero, all the way up, all the way to Adam and Eve. We're hetero. If your teacher thinks you should be otherwise, tell him to talk to me. I'm your parent. Let him argue with me. I have a trained mind. My son, he's young. He's very, very young. You're talking to a guy he's too young to have formulated opinions yet. So this is my big issue, which I think is something that I think most parents feel like. They also agree with me. At least that's.
And I think what you related it to masculinity, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that was very important, because recently, there's been a huge online and offline dispute between evolutionary psychologists and feminists, right? Mm-hmm. So what we find is that they don't want, the feminists and the post-constructivists and these lot, they don't want the idea that patriarchy, traditional gender roles, and what they consider toxic masculinity, but what from a evolutionary psychological point of view is simply a defense mechanism in which the males are overly protective of their females. And I'm going to say their females because that's the hierarchy within which we supposedly evolved. So the feminists don't like that, because it's giving a biological underpinning to something that they believe is a social construct. However, even from a purely materialistic, Darwinistic point of view, these things are inherently biological, and they're there as an evolutionary stable strategy. It's there to stabilize the population so that your progeny continues on and your ideas spread, and all these types of sub mechanisms continue. So when we start to vilify masculinity, we will have situations in which there'll be severe violence towards women, and there'll be the bystander effect. Men will not stand up for women. They will not, if they don't stand up for their women, they will not stand up definitely for other women. I remember one particular evolutionary psychologist. Her name is Leda Cosmides. Her and her husband they're known to be, pioneers of this field for the last 30 or so years. She said this about toxic masculinity and about, feminists and the way that they try and attack masculinity. She said, look, I have a father, and she was, from my understanding, an only child, so her father and then her mom. And she's like, my father, I knew would defend me, and I knew he would have this thing where he'd be masculine and he'd be overprotective and he'd provide and so on, so forth. I don't remember exactly what she was saying, but she was essentially saying, look, this basically silly idea that we don't need this masculinity, we don't need these types of things. No, actually, these are there for a reason, and when you destroy them, you will essentially destroy society.
Can I ask you a question? Tomorrow, imagine there's the Third Reich and the Nazis are knocking on our door, and they look around, they say, where are our men? Oh, you've detoxified them from their toxic masculinity. They can't even pick up a gun now. They have no toxic masculinity. You've weeded them out completely. They've become sheep. Now you're going to be begging for a toxic masculinity. Now's the day. Today, when violence is at the door, you're going to sober up. This is my argument. When violence is at the door, you're praying. You're going to be praying that I conjure up that toxic masculinity you thought that was so disgusting. It's such a lie. It's this open lie we tell ourselves, and it's young children who've never seen violence in their life that say that masculinity is all toxic. Now listen, there is a certain level of masculinity that is toxic. You can have too much masculinity. Okay, I'm with you on that. But what they're saying is absurd. They're just ignorant of history. I'm sorry to tell you, they're spoiled, young, and they're ignorant of history. If tomorrow there's another Reich rising up and we don't have our men to round up and they're not getting us, listen, I'm in the gym all day. I'm in the fight world all day. I see this toxic masculinity. I'm so in it that I don't even see it anymore, okay? There is a time and place where you want to release that toxic masculinity, my friend. There is a time and place where that's the best thing to have around you right now. I'm hoping we have that. Let me give you a really good example. I recently saw this video. It's very disturbing to me. It's about this 75-year-old man sitting on a plane and he's eating. He pulls down his mask. He's eating. And this girl comes up. She jumps out of her chair. She's like, put up your mask. Put up your mask. Now, she's a young girl. I would say 23, let's say. And the guy's like, hey, excuse me, I'm eating. And she's like, put your mask. And she's cursing him. Now, he's a 75-year-old man, but he's got enough youth in him left to hurt her physically.
Yeah.
Not that he would. Not that he should. But in this woman's mind, there's no possibility of violence, In her mind, there's no possibility of violence, okay? And there shouldn't be. She lives in a civil society, okay, fine. I'm for this. 100% agreed. But then she initiates violence. She spits on him. You have to see this video. It just happened recently. She slaps the man.
Aeroplane,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Think about it. They're 10,000 feet in the air, whatever it may be. She slaps the man. She initiates violence. I'm thinking, wow, this is like, she's escalated now. Not only they're on a plane. She's doing this over a man not wearing a mask during eating, which is allowed. By the way, I've been on planes. You're allowed to pull your mask down to eat.
Yeah.
So the man refuses to put a mask. She slaps it, and the guy stays cool. He says, look, that's assault. Now you did it. Now you're in trouble. She could have been a victim. And thank God the guy didn't get up and beat her senseless. Okay. I'm very grateful for you. He didn't. But the thing is, she put herself in such a horrible position. And in my mind, she doesn't understand the reality of the world. Because tomorrow, if she tries that again with the wrong guy, she might get a taste of violence that she doesn't. Listen, Sabur, I'm very familiar, but a broken orbital is a very serious thing. A concussion is a very serious injury.
Yeah.
Broken ribs can kill you. They can puncture your lung and kill you. Like she was, if that was my daughter, I would have been furious with her. I'm telling you, I would have been furious. You don't do that because in her mind, society is going to stop. Like either she doesn't know anything about physical altercation. She thinks society, it's unheard of for a man to hit a woman. Okay, and it's true, and it should be, and I understand. We don't hit women. I'm for that. But she put herself in such an element of danger. But that guy, I'm surprised he was able to control himself because if a woman spit in me and hit me in the face, I wouldn't hit her, but I'll definitely I would definitely grab her and put her down and do a citizen's arrest. Like I would control her physically without harming her, but I would control her physically, and I don't care who's there. There's nobody's gonna be able to stop me. But it seems like the youth today, they don't understand that we live in a very peaceful time, and it wasn't always like that. And to get this peace, we had to fight really hard. To get these rules that protect you, that you can go out and spit on a man and insult him. It took a lot of men dying on the battlefield.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at the Arabs, today, I can go in the Middle East today, lay down on the street with $1 million on my lap, literally $1 million cash on my lap, and nobody's gonna touch it. Why? Because Islam laid a law in the Middle East, and that law protects me from harm. Today, you could walk. Every time I go to the Middle East, I have not a worry in the world. No matter what time of the day I'm walking the street, I know nobody will touch me, nobody will harm me. What did it take to get that peace? Well, if you study the civilization, the Arab civilization, there was no civilization before Islam. 3,000 years of Arab history. It was the law of the jungle, tribe versus tribe, blood feud after blood feud. It was kill or be killed. Who might is right. It took a long time and a lot of fighting to get the world where it is today.
Yeah.
To turn around and say the men who fought and they were bad, because that's what they do. They look back, oh, you fought wars, that was bad. Man, they're so spoiled. They're so spoiled. They benefited so much from toxic masculinity that now they turn around, and I hate to call it that because I should call it bravery. To go out there and meet your opponent on the battlefield and fight to the death. You know, Sabur, I'm in MMA, okay? And I think MMA is the toughest sport in the world. I can't imagine what they did when they fought with swords and bow and arrows and fire and boulders and machine guns and bombs and landmines. To me, when I try to imagine it, how difficult it is for me to see people fight just punching bone on bone. I find that so tough to deal with. Imagine it was swords and friends and family being killed and killing people. Like, how do you sleep at night the next day? The human beings went through so much to build a society that we have today that's stable. We live in a very stable society. If you know your history is just one giant bloodbath to get us to here. We literally live in the most peaceful time in history. And it has a lot to do. It has a lot to do with men standing up and fighting to the death to establish law. If we're on the Titanic, Sabur, and it's sinking, and I yell out, women and children first. Am I being a toxic masculine? Am I toxic? Is that toxic masculinity? Is that toxic masculinity? If I say no, women and children first. Why? Because we're men, by and large, we're stronger. We have more chance to survive. And so what if we die? We're expendable. So what if we die? First of all, a woman, she might be carrying a baby. That's 2 people you save. Second of all, not only are we more robust physically, but if a few of us survive, we can repopulate our civilization. It's true. Where if many men survive and very few women, you won't be able to repopulate civilization. There's a pragmatism to it. Now you put me on a Titanic full of women. Better yet, I'll tell you this, okay? I'm writing a story. Tell me if you're going to buy this book. It's a woman's erotic novel. It's about this guy who he has no toxic masculinity whatsoever. He has a very, very soft voice. He wears dresses and he puts on makeup every day. And he's heterosexual though. And he's the most effeminate human being in the world. And that's the end, the story. That's the story. That would be the world's worst erotic novel. Women would never read this book. The top erotic novels are always Sabur, always a bad guy with a motorcycle who's got a chip on his shoulder, who's untamable, and she has to, maybe if he falls in love with her, he'll change his ways for her. It's always the most toxic, masculine men seem to be what women secretly always want to buy and sell. That's what they spend their dollars on, Sabur. That's what I believe they really want. They tell you, oh, I want a guy who rolls over and begs for a snack, a dog treat. A lap dog. I want a lap dog. I want a boyfriend who's a lap dog. I want a husband who's a lap dog. But then when it's time to spend their dollars on what entertains them, they're going to buy listen, Western women speak against toxic masculinity, but they spend their dollars on the most toxic men. They love and they're attracted to the most toxic men. And Arabs, we have a machismo. We admit we have to. Men are men.
Yeah.
And you know what? I always tell my sons, I always tell all my students, I said, Are you attracted to masculine females or feminine females? They always tell me feminine, of course. What do you think women are attracted to? They're attracted to masculine traits. Now, again, it's a subjective term. But the point being is, don't believe what they're telling you. It's not true. You're gonna get what they call in the West here, they call it friend zoned. Oh, you're nice, we accept you, but we don't want nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
You get friend zoned. Guys like me, we get married over and over again. We get remarried. If I get divorced, I'll get remarried. It won't be long before I'm remarried. It won't be long. My toxic masculinity won't get in the way of me getting married. Believe me, I'll get remarried quickly, very quickly. They're convincing the youth that if you want women to like you, you have to behave in a certain way. It's totally untrue. My biggest argument, read what's their number one romantic novels. Read what it is, their romantic novel. It's always a toxic male. It's always a question of toxic masculinity. It's the thing that makes them most entertained. Okay, if I'm on the Titanic and I say women and children first, I'm not being toxic. Nobody, even the most hardcore feminist, is going to agree with me now. She won't agree with me when we're in the classroom. No. But when we're on the ship and the sharks are circling the water, because the first few bodies have fallen in already, and the sharks know there's blood in the water, and they're circulating, and it's me or her who gets in the boat, and I'm like, after you, ladies first. She's not gonna say I'm a toxic. She's not gonna say I'm a toxic male. Women throughout history never talked about toxic masculinity. Why? Because they knew that what was standing between them and the tribes from the other world, from the other side, was their men. Okay, there is no when violence is on the table, Sabur. They're going to sober up. Now there's no violence. There's no great war. There's no great invasion. We're the allies in World War II. Were there being toxic? Was that toxic masculinity? When they stormed Normandy, were the women like, hey, no. It should be one woman, one man, 50-50. We're going with you guys. We're going to hold in solidarity. Okay, it was a different time then. They didn't have feminists. Tomorrow, we have a new Normandy. If we have a new Normandy, it's illogical. Think about this, Sabur. Imagine me and you, we're going to war. You have your nation, I have mine. I'm going to send 50% women and 50% men because I'm fair.
Yeah. You're
going to send 99% of your men. Half my men die, half my women die. I come back. The next year when we fight, I have half the population you have. You've repopulated. You're ready for the second meeting. Every year or two we're fighting. You're going to quickly outdo me. Why? Yeah. Because you need a certain number of men to repopulate your civilization. 10 years from now, the next generation is already fighting me, and I'm not ready. I'm not repopulated yet. History wasn't the champions of history are not the champions because they were dumb. They did what was pragmatic, what was smart, and there's a prestige that comes with that. If you go on a campaign for 3-4 years and you come back, Sabur, and you conquered your enemies and you brought us back resources, you deserve that prestige. Yeah, you deserve, as you retire, as you get older, to become the chief. You deserve to become the leader of our world. You deserve to be the head of our civilization. You deserved it. You earned it. You were correct in making those calls. You went on the battlefield. You made the right choices. You got the spoils. You're the hero of this generation. You deserve it. Today, to come here and live in the sweet civilized society and act the way they do, it's just pure ignorance. Believe me, once violence, and trust me, I'm a guy who's seen too much violence in his life. They will sober up quickly. I'll tell you one more anecdote. Yeah, I had a feminist. I had the world's greatest feminist walk into my gym, like a real feminist. And don't get me wrong, I think women could be great athletes. I think women could be intellectuals. I hold women in high regard. Okay, I hold women in extremely high regard. But what I'm saying is, don't critique the decisions of the past. They were champions for a reason. The heroes of our history were champions for a reason. That's all I'm trying to say. This woman came and she asked me we're sparring, boxing. Now, I don't wrestle with women, but I'll box with women because there's no physical contact, really. Okay, we're just like boxing, So I was boxing with her and she got angry with me. She said, "You're not hitting me like if I was a man." I said, "Well, you're smaller than me. Like, I'm much more experienced than you." And she got upset with me. She's like, "I want you to hit me like I'm a man." I said, "It's not right. I can't do that." So I didn't spar with her anymore. She got angry with me. We had an issue. I tried to have somebody talk to her. She was very upset. She wants me to spar with her like I spar with a professional fighter. I'm like, it's not even the question that you're a woman. You're smaller than me. She's like literally 40 pounds smaller than me. And she has 15 years less training than me, 20 years less training than me. Like, she was very adamant. So I had a smaller, I'm telling you, after she kept arguing with all of it. "Oh, you're treating your sexist." I let one guy give her a body shot, a smaller instructor of mine, about her size. I'm like, look, just give her a taste. Don't hurt her. Give her a taste. He floored her with a body shot. Give her a body shot, hit in the body, very safe, no broken bones. Like, the guy's a black belt. He knows what he's doing. He's not going to hurt her. But she's campaigning for this. And I understand she's never felt it. You've never touched the hot pot. You don't know what being burned is. I get it. Okay. I tried to talk to her rationally. She didn't want. She petitioned. She said I was sexist. She wrote it on the internet that we're sexist. She campaigned against us. I said, okay, we'll let you spar. She gets dropped with a body shot. She never asked for it again. She never asked for us to spar with her like she's a man again. There's a reality in this world, guys. There's a reality in this world. There is a harm that when violence is on the table, when profit and loss is life-threatening, then all your theories in the classroom, many of them will fall by the wayside. It's theoretical. This whole thing of stop letting men be men. This whole thing is just a crazy theory that you will really regret in the future, in my opinion. Okay, because don't get me wrong, I'm not saying women can't be fighters. I've seen women that are real fighters, just as tough or tougher than men. But there is, on average, a colossal difference between the physical attributes of a man and a woman. Yeah. You go and you try to create the world's best football team, women's football team, American football. And you put them against the world's best. There's a reason why we separate men and women in sports, guys. There's a reality out there that why don't women petition that female wrestlers wrestle male wrestlers? If you're feminist, if you're a third wave feminist, if you're a third or fourth wave feminist, why don't you petition that men and women should be able to fight in boxing together? Nobody does that. Why? We all agree, look, there are physical limitations. There are things that shouldn't be done. I personally don't want to see a woman fight a man. Even if the woman wins, because there are women that could beat men, there's no doubt. But by and large, on average, there's going to be a colossal advantage to the men. It goes to the men. You see it in sports.
Yeah.
That's why we separate each other. It's once you take these theories and put them on the table, in principle, we're equal, yes, but there are things that women are better than men, and there are things that men are better than women. If I'm laying down in my bed at night, somewhere, and there's a strange sound in the home, and I think it's an intruder, I don't send my wife. And if I sent my wife and something happened to her, my sons what are they going to think of me? Well, Dad, you're fair. One time it's you that checks, one time it's Mom that checks. My sons would disown me. They would think of me, I'm a coward.
Yeah, absolutely.
They would curse me. They would probably spit on me. They would think I'm a fool. I'm a loser. I'm a nothing to them.
Yeah.
And I would have died 1,000 deaths. Shakespeare was right. A coward dies 1,000 deaths. He's right. Don't listen to these feminists that tell you that we're equal in every single way, in every single element, socially speaking. There's a time where men have to step up and take care of business. If I'm sleeping in the middle of the night and I hear a strange sound, there's no doubt in my wife's mind that I'm going to get up. And I'm willing to die or kill to protect my family. And that is a very important definition when it comes to man. They're trying to take away from our youth. Like it's going to backfire on the men who accept it. They're going to find themselves friend zoned. And this is just a friendly warning to men out there. I know a lot of guys are going to take this and write an article about what I just said. I know a lot of guys right now are so happy. Oh, they're typing away. Oh, coach said so many things. I don't take any of this back. I 100% stand behind what I said. I'm telling you, young men out there, don't let them feminize you. Be respectful to women. There's a hadith that says women, they're half the population and they gave birth to the other half. Women are the most important person in society. The mother is the greatest person in your society.
Yeah. So sorry to
nobody higher.
Yeah, sorry to distract you. That's the statement of Imam Josie. Yeah, it's not a hadith, but still.
It's not a hadith. Pardon me. I've heard it. So I'm conflating it. Pardon me.
Yeah.
I get hit in the head a lot, Sabur. Okay. It's all jumbled. It's somewhere in there. It's jumbled up.
Yeah. Anytime you hear, always fact check. Always fact check,
please.
guys. We're happy for you guys to fact check. But
reliable.
I just wanted you to just segue this into the next part, which fits in really well, which is the unfair treatment of the historical wars of Islam, being treated as if Muslims were doing something completely outrageous When at the and I think a lot of this is this Karen reading of history.
Yes.
Why did the ancients do this? Why did they do that? Why didn't the Romans and the Persians sit down and have rose water? Why were they fighting? And then when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, sadly, Peterson called the Prophet ﷺ a warlord, and he didn't actually understand the historical realities of the time. And it's the sort of thing you would expect from a postmodernist critic of Islam rather than Peterson. But nonetheless,
to his credit, he walked his comments back, and I
He
have
did.
the utmost respect for him. I have
absolutely,
the utmost respect for Peterson. He walked it back, said, "You know what? I put my foot in my mouth. I'm paraphrasing here. I was wrong. I can't say he's a warlord. I can't say that."
absolutely. So I'm just going to play that section, and
Yeah.
we could just have a little chat about it.
Example, like one of the defensive wars, Hamza died. And by the way, Muhammad forgave his killer. And that's something which goes against the warlord thesis, because when he then conquered Mecca, it was actually no fighting. I'm not sure if you know this. It's called Fath Mecca. When he went into and conquered Mecca, he didn't fight anybody. It was no fighting. There were a few people that were exempted, but he actually quoted what Joseph quoted to his brothers in the Quran, which is "La tathriba alaykum al-yawm," that no blame is on you today. And this, by the way, is a bedrock example of forgiveness in Islam, because these were people that were persecuting him for 13 years. These are people that killed his uncle. Like I said, there's one person called Wahshi who literally killed his uncle and mutilated his body. And he said to Wahshi, "I forgive you, but I can't see your face because of how he said, ممكن تغيب عني وجهك وجهك عني." He said, "Can you keep your face away from me, because psychologically I can't bring my face, but I do forgive you," he said. So he forgave people that killed his own family members. And this was after he himself attempted a treaty with the pagans called Hudaybiyah. And so they broke the treaty, and that's what initiated the conquest of Mecca, which was not a conquest that was fighting. Now, if you compare this, because I think the comparison, if there's any comparison that can be or should be made, it's Jesus' second coming with Muhammad in the Medinan period, not in the Meccan period. In the Meccan period, both were being persecuted, Jesus in his life and Muhammad in the Meccan period. But Jesus, when he comes back, he will then get authority, and he will be ruling with the iron scepter, according to the Bible. He will be crushing his enemies, as it says in Corinthians, under his foot, humbling his enemies under his foot, and killing and violent stuff. So, in fact, I will actually argue today that the New Testament representation,
Millions of people, adults and children alike, are suffering extreme hunger and
of Jesus Christ in his second coming is way more violent than Muhammad's conquests in the Medinan period.
Okay, well, look, like I said, I wasn't trying to make the case. I wasn't trying to make the case that what happened in Mecca or Medina was wrong. So let me explain that a little bit. So Christian Europe fought a defensive war against the Nazis. It isn't obvious that that was wrong.
I don't think that was. I wouldn't say that's defensive.
Well, okay, fine, but I understand the concept of defensive war.
Well, when America got involved in World War II, it was not under immediate threat by Germany, and they colonized it. And here's the thing: it overtook Western Germany. You see, and here's the thing: the term warlord that you use with the Prophet, you've never used with Harry Truman. You've never used with Roosevelt. You've never used with Winston Churchill, all of which conquered countries literally in wars. Because I feel like there is a bias there, and you've actually never used it with anybody else aside from the Prophet Muhammad in your public output. And I think that's unjustifiable. I think that you have biblical prophets like Moses, you have biblical prophets like Joshua, you have the Jesus in his second coming, all of which were warrior prophets, and you've only used the term warlord with the Prophet Muhammad, and I think that is unjustifiable. I think if what is it that what makes someone a warlord then? If it's conquering lands, then Harry Truman is a warlord. Then and so on and so forth. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad.
Well, I
went,
guess that's a real tough question, isn't it? What makes a warlord and what makes a just war? It's not like any of us have the precise answers to that. And that's what partly what we're trying to hash out
there
right
are
here.
definitions of the word warlords. The definition of the word warlord, according to Collins, is that someone who acquires force by aggressivity and violence.
Well,
you know,
okay,
in the
so
political
fine.
science,
You pushed back on me, so I'll push back on you to some degree.
Okay.
Well, it's certainly the case that the expansion of the Islamic Empire was accomplished by a tremendous amount of warlike activity, and that wasn't defensive. Now, look, I understand that monotheism is a difficult state to attain, and that monotheistic societies have emerged in the midst of conflict throughout human society. I understand that, and I'm not even saying that there's something exceptional in that regard about Islam, although the rate at which it happened was quite remarkable. But it presents us with a problem, doesn't it? I mean, it presents everyone with a problem. And the problem is, well, for example, the problem is reconciling the idea of turning the other cheek with the idea of a just war, a defensive war, or an expansive war for that matter. And of course, that issue is relevant to Islam because Islam exploded outward and produced the biggest empire the world had ever seen in the space of a few short centuries.
Yeah, but Dr. Jordan Peterson.
So then you ask, well, what is the spirit that animated that? And is that attributable to the Islamic doctrines themselves?
Yes,
I don't know the answer to that.
No, let me tell you the answer to that, okay? And this is what I want to tell you conclusively, and this will help build bridges, honestly. Because we can maintain the warlord thesis, we can maintain the expansionist thesis. But here's what I'll tell you. Islam has a capability to be expansive, and it also has a capability of making peace treaties. And it does, and it should do whatever's in its best interest. Just like every country should do whatever's in its best interest. In the pre-modern world, we did not, I think this is highly anachronistic. In the pre-modern world, there was no such thing as the UN. It was a realist international relations framework whereby everybody was fighting everyone. The Roman Empire didn't care about it didn't care about you, quite frankly. It was expanding itself. The Persian Empire was expanding itself. And the Arabian Peninsula was in between both. And so it could have either been swallowed by those two other empires, or it could decide to, in fact, we will impose our government on them. And it did, rather than the latter, it decided to expand. And in fact, the Prophet, in his weakest of times, he predicted that would happen. You know, there was one war in particular where they were starving, and it's called Khandaq, and he hit a rock and he said, Futihat Rum, the Roman Empire has been conquered. He hit a rock again. He said, Futihat Faris, that the Persian Empire has been conquered. And then he knocked the rock again. He said this in his weakest moment. He said that the Yemen has been conquered. I see that the expansion of the Islamic Empire is a proof for Islam. And you know, it's not just me. Even historians say this. Barnaby Rogerson, he said the fact that Islam spread to the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire is equivalent to is equivalent to Eskimos taking over Russia and America. I believe it's miraculous, if anything, that this happened. I don't think it's unjustifiable. I think actually Jordan Peterson, to be
then
completely
why
honest
did
with
it
you,
stop at Europe's borders, so to speak? If it was a
well,
miraculous expansion,
yeah, it stopped out because of it wasn't successful there. It wasn't. It stopped where it couldn't go further. But the point is that it's not like the Christians at that time in Rome cared. I mean, they did the same thing for years. They were expanding themselves.
Well, that's why I said I wasn't making a prima facie case that this was wrong. I'm trying to understand it. And you objected to my use of the term warlord, and perhaps rightly so. You know, perhaps that was an injudicious comment. I was rather shocked when I was reading Islamic history when I encountered the degree of violence that surrounded these events. And so, you know, maybe I was
I appreciate what you said there. I think that shows real sincerity in it, and it's one step closer to creating real meaningful relationships between
I think
there's a lot to discuss there. I mean, there's a lot there. That's a lot. That was a long clip, and there's a lot of information there. Like, for instance, you know, hijab is referring to something called the historian's fallacy. Okay, so for instance, I try to judge somebody that lived 5,000 years ago or 100 years ago by my modern day understanding and information that I have today. Was it weird that people did this in their culture? Well, to them it was normal. To us, it's weird. Why? Because we live in a totally different time with totally different experiences. We're a different generation completely. So here, there's a common historian's fallacy that's often practiced. They say, look at Jesus, look at Muhammad. Jesus didn't do this, Jesus didn't do that. Well, Jesus was not a head of state. If you compare Jesus's ministry, alayhi salam, it was 3 years. It was 3 years. It was a very short ministry. He led, let's call it 12 men. Okay. He led the 12. That's how they're referred to, as the 12.
Yeah.
Muhammad, when he only had 12 disciples, or Sahabi, or companions, let's call them, he was very similar to Jesus. Jesus was never head of state. In the book of John, when Jesus meets Pontius Pilate, Pontius asks him, are you a king? Like, basically, the term son of God, back then, the Caesar on the coins in the time of Jesus said son of God. Caesar, son of God. Son of God means that's our leader. There's God. If you ask the Greeks, who's the son of God, they're going to say Hercules. Zeus is the god. Hercules is like a semi-god. They had, this is Jonathan Crossan, not me. Okay, he's a scholar. He's a biblical scholar. He says, look, the term son of God, what it meant to them was, are you the leader? Are you the leader of the Jews? Is this a coup? Is this a coup? There was a few million Jews in Rome. Is this a coup? Are you guys going to rebel against me? If this was my kingdom, my army would fight you. This is what Jesus replies to him. If this was my kingdom, in the book of John, he says, we would fight you. I'm not fighting you. I'm not fighting you. When the Jews asked Jesus, should we pay our taxes to the Caesar? He said, give me a coin, right? He says, give me a coin. Looks at it. Oh, it says Caesar on it. Give it to him. The way they interpret it is, hey, it's a trap. If he says pay the tax, he can't be the Messiah, because the Messiah is supposed to come and liberate the Jews. It's supposed to be a coup. When the Messiah comes, he's supposed to conquer the Romans. It's supposed to be a coup. He's supposed to liberate Jerusalem. If he says don't pay Caesar, this is a coup, I am the leader, I am the Messiah, then the Jews can go and tell the Romans, hey, this guy's telling everybody not to pay taxes. Guess what's going to happen to him? He's going to get crucified. Literally, crucifixion was reserved for people trying to create a coup, a bandit, somebody trying to strip authority from Rome. Okay? Was it a coup? Is it not? He gave a perfect answer. He walked the line. He said, look, I don't even recognize this as money. Is this what they call money? That's his stuff. He printed it. That belongs to him. It doesn't belong to me. I work in a different system. So he didn't deny paying taxes to Caesar, and he didn't deny being the Messiah. He walked a very fine line. If Jesus was the head of state, how could we imagine him? If he did have an army, if he was faced nose to nose with Caesar, how would he behave? Well, scholars say two things. Either he would behave like Moses, because if it's the triune God is true, if Jesus is the God of Moses, if before Abraham was I am, if that is true, he delegated to Moses exactly what to do. And if you read the Torah, there's a lot of fighting going on. There's way more violent than what happened in later, like in Islamic history. Way more violent. Okay. And I don't think the Bible, guys, I want to be clear. I don't think the Bible is a book about violence. I think the Bible, I think Judaism is about peace. I think Christianity is about peace, and I think Islam is about peace. I think all three of them are about morality and peace. However, if you see Moses is dispatched to defeat his enemies, destroy them, kill them all, their animals, their oxes, everything, kill them all. Either Jesus was the head of state then, or he's going to be the head of state in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, Mohammed Hijab is referring to is God is going to make Jesus' enemies his footstool. When he comes back, he's going to kill, I can't remember, it's 3/4 or half the Jews. The Jews that don't convert to Christianity, they're dead. They die. He's going to rule for 1,000 years with an orb of steel, an iron orb. He's going to rule with might. It's going to be an iron-fisted type rule. You understand? When this Messiah comes back, the Christians say, you guys are done. So when he is head of state, how is he going to behave? These are the two indicators we have. Now, if you look at Muhammad's life, he was head of state. When he wasn't head of state, his behavior was exactly like Jesus. Exactly. He was patient with his enemies. His enemies ridiculed him. They spit on him. They threw dead carcasses on him when he was praying. They did every bad thing you could do to a human being. They did it. They insulted him. They attacked his daughters. They did every horrible thing. Even when his son died, When his son died, the Quraysh, his enemies rejoiced. They made fun of him that his progeny is dead. He's cursed. He's cursed. Our gods are cursing him. Then he left Medina, became the head of state. He offered them, no, the first three wars, the first three Islamic wars were all defensive. Even I consider the war of the conquest of Mecca, it's not even a war. The fourth war, let's call it the fourth war, the conquest of Mecca. So you have Badr, Uhud, Khandak, all defensive wars, all the pagans trying to eliminate the Muslims. They're getting together, they want to eradicate Muslims. They want to commit a genocide. Muhammad's companions during the wars, they die. They're literally mutilated. I don't even want to describe it, what happened. It's in the Quran. This is bedrock history. You know, Mohammed Hijab is saying this is bedrock history. Nobody disagrees to this. There's no revisionist historian saying that or this didn't happen. They all agree. The first three battles were missions from the pagans to eradicate Muslims. They mutilated, they desecrated the bodies of the Muslims when they killed them. They humiliated the Muslims. They robbed the Muslims of their homes. They did every bad thing in the book. When Muhammad conquered them, alayhi salam, when he conquered them on the conquest of Mecca, here's the interpretation of the Quran. If you know, everybody wants to interpret the Quran. Here we have the Prophet of God. We have the Quran almost in its entirety. We have the Meccan, we have the Medina Surah. It's all in there. It's all there. I don't care what scholar comes after. Nobody can interpret higher than the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. Nobody. He conquers Mecca. Here's the Quran in action now. If you're going to take all the verses, you're not going to cherry pick. We're putting them all together. He forgave all his enemies. Now, the person that Muhammad was referring to, where the Prophet tells him, look, can you go sit at the back of the prayer line? Because it's too painful for me to look at you. It's the man who killed his uncle. His uncle was speared by a man, assassinated by a man who converts to Islam later. And this man liked to sit in the front of the prayer lines. So Muhammad alayhi salam asked him, please, because it was so painful for him to look upon the face of the killer, a man who killed his uncle, his beloved uncle. Can you sit in the back of there? Like, can you go sit in, in the later rows? Because it's so painful for me. He accepted the man who murdered his uncle, his adopted father, the man who took care of him for many, many years, who raised him. Muhammad forgave all his enemies. Abu Sufyan, Hind, if you guys know who Hind is, she was one of the most vile persons, actually literally took a bite of his uncle's liver. Like, we're talking about vile human behavior here, like the most vile. And when Muhammad rode in on a camel in Mecca, and he conquered the Meccans, he conquered his enemies without any violence, 10,000 Muslims marching peacefully, chanting, not fighting. This was not only first time in history, never been done before. He also leaned down on his camel. He was leaning down. He didn't come in like a proud conqueror. He leaned down. The hadith say he's leaning downwards. He's not coming in like with pride. Some of them, these people he's conquering, he's related to. These are people that betrayed him, family members. Long story short, if you look at the context of which he conquered the Meccans, he should have slaughtered them all. That would be the norm. He didn't. He forgave them all. He created a new precedence. This is incredible. This is an incredible event in history. This is the interpretation of the Quran. This is bedrock history. Nobody disagrees. The European scholars agree this happened. The Islamic scholars, the atheistic scholars, we all agree. That's what we call bedrock history. When everybody agrees, there's no evidence to the contrary. All our evidence points to this is how it happened. Bedrock history, that's the interpretation of the Quran. That's the interpretation of the Quran I live by. When you read the Quran, defensive wars is the only war. You have just war and defensive war. There is no, in my opinion, there is no offensive war. The Quran explicitly, not implicitly, explicitly says, don't say to them who offers you peace, you're not a believer. Don't say to somebody who offers you peace, hey, you're not a believer, hoping you're going to get spoils in this world. Meaning, in Islam, you cannot expand your kingdom or your nation because you want to get resources. You can't. You have to have a just war. So for instance, Umar ibn Khattab, when he invaded the Persians, he said, I wish there was a wall of fire between us and the Persians. Why? Because they wouldn't accept terms with Muslims. Muslims have a very simple concept. we live in society, we live in civilization together, we live in peace, we have a treaty together, or if you refuse the treaty, that's a declaration of war. The Prophet ﷺ, he would have loved the Geneva Convention. He would have loved all the United Nations. He would have loved this. This is where Islam is going to. He made a peace treaty with all his neighbors. When he was in Medina, he made the Charter of Medina. It's a constitution between people who don't believe the same thing, who come from different backgrounds, who agree to live as one nation, defend themselves as one nation, and live in peace with one another. It's actually it's a beautiful thing. Actually, it's a leap in thinking. Muhammad alayhi salam, on top of that, was an anti-racist. The Arab and the non-Arab are equal. Imagine that. In his time, where Arabs are incredibly racist, even till this day, I would say the Arabs are still, despite Islam, still have elements of racism. A black and a white are equal. Arab and a non-Arab equal. You can marry, you can mix races, no problem. Everybody is equal under the law. Everybody has the right to security. You have the right to your own religion. It was incredible what he did. Now, in my opinion, Muslims didn't live up to it later on down the line. Some Muslims were enticed by the spoils of this world, exactly what the Quran forbids. But that, for me, is not what I follow. I look at Muhammad, what he did. He's the walking Quran. He interprets the Quran correctly. He conquered his enemies. Those who gave him a peace treaty, he didn't conquer. He didn't fight. He stabilized the peninsula because he had a 13-year war with the pagans. He stabilized the peninsula. Till today, the peninsula is stable and safe. Where, of course, his Sahaba continued his mission, but he stabilized the Arab Peninsula. Today, you could walk around the Arab Peninsula with perfect safety. It's a safe place, barring war zones, etc., more conflict, but the people respect the law. Whereas look at the Arabs before Islam. It was a kill or be killed, clan versus clan, tribe versus tribe, blood feud, never-ending blood feuds. I like how Juan Cole pulls it. He's a scholar in Islam, a non-Muslim. He says, look, when Muhammad was born, it must have seemed to him, he was trying to build a context, like the whole world is at war. Not only with the Persians and the Romans at war, every tribe around him was at war with another. The whole world is literally at war. So he was raised in a place where it seems like there's nothing, there's no peace. Peace doesn't exist. So it's an incredible context, and a very different context than the Jesus Christ story. It's just an extremely different context.
Absolutely. And while you were mentioning certain things, it just came to my mind that there's some authentic narrations of the Prophet ﷺ which fit really well with the discussion that was happening. And of course, in the middle of the discussion, it's hard for Hijab or anyone else in his place to come up with these references. The first one is found in Abu Dawood, and it is basically leave the Abyssinians alone as long as they leave you alone, and leave the Turks alone as long as they leave you alone. Okay, so this is a very beautiful narration, because at that particular time, like Hijab mentioned, a realist perspective in international relations, and a realist perspective in international relations is where states' primary concern is their own preservation, their own security, and there's a lot of preemptive aggression against other states. So here what we find is the Prophet ﷺ is saying to the Muslims that the Turks and the Abyssinians, leave them alone as long as they leave you alone. So I'll just paraphrase that narration. Mm-hmm. The other one is something that I have seen. It is in Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith. And it was not only in his book. I remember on BBC, there was a program in which one of his fanboys stood up and said this particular narration. And this narration is supposed to be a glorification of war and a glorification of this type of chaos. And what Sam Harris quotes is basically this: paradise is under the shade of swords. So when you hear paradise is under the shade of swords, you would think, right, just take out a sword, start fighting, continuous chaos and anarchy and warfare, and then everybody goes to basically paradise, right? But actually, here is the full narration, which he didn't put in his book. And sadly, he's now popularized it. The full narration, which is found in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, is this. The Prophet ﷺ says, O people, do not desire to meet the enemy, but rather ask Allah for safety. If you meet your enemy in battle, be patient and know that paradise is under the shade of swords. A complete different meaning.
Complete different context. And you know what, you could
Allahu Akbar.
It's incredible. And you know what the thing is, Sam Harris, in my opinion, he's selling books. He's selling books. He's not that dumb that he interprets Islam that way. He's not that dumb. There's no way you could read the entire Quran. He claims to have read it 3 times and be that dumb. He's not that dumb.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's a high IQ. I know he's a high IQ individual. He can't be that dumb. He's just selling books. He's pushing buttons. Yeah. He would never do what Peterson did. He would never sit down and have a heart-to-heart and try to understand a different. No, that doesn't sell books, man. You look in the Quran, not even 1% or maybe 1% of the verses are about war. The whole Quran is about justice. But the Quran, it covers every topic of the world, and it tells you, look, go to war on these conditions only.
Yep.
You read the entire Quran in its context, you won't say that these people are out to harm us. No, you wouldn't say that. You would say, look, it says explicitly in the Quran that God never loved the starters of war. You never started the war. You can never start the war. Fight them if they start the war with you. If they incline to peace, you incline to peace. Yeah. It's over and over again. It gives permission to fight under these circumstances. It says, be certain, meaning be certain it's a just war. If you kill one innocent human being, it's like if you killed all of humanity. You cannot kill one innocent human being. Yeah. Me, I don't care how many scholars you bring out. I will never accept a war that is not just or defensive. There has to be a good reason for Muslims to go to war. I personally would never pick up a gun and fire at somebody else unless it was defensive or there was a just reason. They were oppressing or they were refusing, certain terms because of, we have to live as neighbors. Maybe they're not allowing certain resources to come through, or whatever it may be. There are complex situations that could arise where neighbors have to have an agreement over a certain resource, fresh water or whatever it may be. Yeah. Everybody has to live on a certain amount of resources. We need it to live and survive, etc. The wars have to be just or they have to be defensive. Never for worldly gain. Never for worldly gain. Oh, I want to be rich. Let me go invade my neighbors and plunder them. No, this is not in Islam. This doesn't exist in Islam. And it's explicit in the Quran. I don't care what hadith you bring me from, nothing supersedes explicit statements from the Quran. Nothing, in my opinion. And I'm not an Islamic scholar. As a philosopher, I'm telling you, if I read the Quran and I tell you, look, I'm reading this book, I'm trying to use all my 20 years of epistemology to understand what this book is saying. It's telling you, look, explicitly. You don't have to read between the lines. You don't have to be an expert here. It's telling you directly. God never loved the starters of war. Oppression is worse than death. So if you're oppressed, you might as well fight, even if you fight to the death, even if they kill you. It's better to die standing on your feet and dying for the right reasons than to cower and let people oppress you. So Islam is not a conquest ideology. It's not, Hamza Yusuf, he says, look, conquest ideology is a myth. It's a myth. It's something that came later. People wanted to expand Islam. There were leaders that wanted to emphasize certain things to expand their personal agendas. If you look at bedrock history in Islam, it wasn't about resources. Islam is not about plundering your enemies, plundering your neighbor. It's about peace, stability. Peace and stability.
Yeah,
the Quran is very explicit about this. Like nobody could convince me a war attacking my enemy and taking his things is halal. This doesn't exist in the Quran.
Well, what's interesting is what we find in the direct, clear injunctions in the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ is the paradigm that warfare in Islam does not fit the realist paradigm. Yeah. So even though the Muslims were working within the framework of a realist paradigm, they are always putting up their wars with a veneer of civility and some moral high ground or human rights or whatever it is, like with the Iraq war. But behind that veneer, there is the self-interest of oil or gas or gold or whatever it actually is. And it's been like that throughout history. So in many ways, Islam is at a severe disadvantage in that those types of wars are not permitted when they are actually permitted for others according to their worldview. And what's interesting is that some of the people who made these types of decisions, because in Islamic history we've had countless leaders and governors and whatnot, what we've found is that people have made absolutely absurd decisions sometimes, to the point that we know, and we have documents showing that there were points in which there were people under Muslim governance who were converting to Islam, and they were previously paying jizya, and the ruler at the time was worried and actually upset that people are converting because they're no longer going to be paying jizya. That obviously showed that where his priorities lay. So just because there have been times in the past where Muslim rulers have initiated wars for resources, and not only against non-Muslims but also against weaker Muslim states. But this is not Islam. And like you rightfully mentioned, the explicit clear verses of the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, no matter how someone tries to put a spin on it, it is very difficult to undermine those heavy core concepts which appear as paradigms throughout the text. And it's very hard for people.
Exactly, and here's the thing. Was the Vietnam War just? Well, early on, there was a huge sentiment that it was just, it was noble, and then after that, the pendulum swung, and everybody thinks it's horrible. It's a bad idea. Today, we look back at the Vietnam War, it was a bad idea. Is the same thing going to happen with the Iraqi war? I think it's already starting. I think a lot of people now, because when they first went into Iraq, it was very controversial, and then it was seen as good, and then it was seen as, now it's seen more as bad and bad. Like revisionist history, people always look back and interpret things differently. Our biases today are going to change. Tomorrow we're going to interpret things differently that happened in the past. For instance, Christopher Columbus was hailed as a hero for many years, and now today, the kids don't like him no more. Why? Oh, he was a devil. Things can be reviewed over and over again. However, what Muhammad did in Mecca, what he did in Hudaybiyah is bedrock history, and I don't think anybody can critique him. I think what he did in his life was so exemplary.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that he forgave his enemies, he made his greatest enemy, Abu Sufyan, he made his son a scribe of the Quran. Like Abu Sufyan requested, give my son a special position. He made him a scribe of the Quran. Like, I don't know any other human being in history did something like this.
Not only this, what's very sorry to cut you off, Firas, but
no, please do.
The greatest general in Islam after the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ is obviously the greatest general, is Khalid bin Walid. And Khalid bin Walid was the enemy of Islam, who the Prophet ﷺ enticed through, who he gave dawah to, despite him being a killer of Muslims, despite him being an explicit enemy of Islam. So the beautiful thing, and there's a really good book, Generalship of Muhammad Sallallahu by Russ Rogers, right? And he talks about how the Prophet Sallallahu warfare was essentially psychological more than physical, how he took his enemies out of their experience and how he kept his men within his experience, and how in fact that his entire war philosophy created a super tribe, the Ummah, right? Which went beyond race and nation and the greatness of your forefathers and all these types of things. And this does not fit the realist framework. The realist framework is do what you can, speak the truth or half truth or lie until you can get the resources of the other person, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, nobody can say that this type of expansionist realist framework, which applies to the Persians and the Romans and others, can apply to him. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to highlight, which is about the pragmatism part, which comes on later on. So do you want to wrap up this warfare section, and I can play that?
Just another thing. Like, Islam is expanding today. It's the fastest growing people in the world, like the fastest growing group. Is it happening today by war? Is it? It's not.
No.
It's birth rate. It's birth rate. It's birth rate. That's all it is. And in the time of the Prophet, when did Islam grow the fastest? Was in the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah. After Hudaybiyah, they were promised 10 years of war. That's where Islam exploded, because they could preach without warfare. War slowed down the mission of the Prophet. It didn't speed it up. During the time of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah is when the Muslims got to 10,000.
Yeah.
After the peace treaty was broken, because the pagans, feeling threatened, hey, their numbers are growing, tribes are converting to their religion. This could be really, people should know that the pagans believed in God. They believed in Allah, like the one God. They believed in him already. It's just that they had other gods that people paid homage to, and it was money. It was economics. If you cleared all our pagan gods, it's going to hurt the bank. That's the truth. Yeah. So they gathered all these tribes that pay homage, that have interest in these pagan gods, and they said, let's go eradicate them now. We have to eradicate them now because they're only believing in one God. Think about it. That's why the Quran criticizes the pagans. Why did you kick them out of their homes? Why do you persecute them? Just because they believe in Allah. You already believe in Allah. What is your issue? Admit it. Basically, the Quran is saying it's money. Your issue is money. That's the truth. You know, like, we know what the pagans' incentive was. It's to keep the money flowing. Not that they necessarily had an allegiance to these gods per se.
Yeah.
Now, we have to always remember, Islam does really good, does really well in a time of peace. We don't need war. We don't need war. When Muslims fight, they spread Islam less, in my opinion. Now, look, I'm not an expert on how Islam spread. I'm not. But I will tell you something right now. It's a fact. It's the fastest growing religion in the world. We're the fastest growing people in the world. And I don't think it's going to stop. And we don't need a war. We really don't need a war. What you need is good discourse. That's it.
Yeah.
It's a natural thing for people to believe in one God. It's not that complicated. It's really not that complicated.
And you know what's interesting as well about if you look at the Islamic history, especially in the last 800 years, where we have the rise of the Turkic people. So here, you know, the different Turkic nations that exist, the Uyghurs, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, Tajiks, Turkmens, they're all essentially part of the greater Turkic people. And these Turkic people were never conquered by Muslims. These Turkic people converted to Islam through Muslim missionary efforts. We have direct evidence that, in fact, the first group of people who converted to Islam amongst the Turkic people were actually the Uyghur people. And there is a sultan, there was a leader that they had whose name was Sultan Satuk Burga Khan. And this sultan, and we're talking about the mid-950s, this sultan was a follower of Tangriism. He believed in the religion which, you know, the blue sky god, and, you know, basically the religion of the Mongols, because they were close to the Mongols. And what happened is he came across Persian Sunni, not scholars, merchants who were traveling because they were not too far away. And he started interacting with them. He accepted Islam. Then, because this is just the way of the world today, but not the way of the world, just in the past, but even today, that if a ruler became Muslim, then most of the population became Muslim. And we may think of that as very primitive and tribal, but the same thing happens with celebrities. A celebrity adopts a particular
Same thing happened with Constantine. That's how Christianity exploded. You know, Christianity grew when Constantine converted, among other reasons as well. But Constantine was definitely one of the most highly influential Christians in history. So absolutely. I mean, I understand that completely, and they take it upon him. Look, you're our leader. You read the books. Most people are not literate. We trust you that you're telling us that this is true, and you're responsible for us. You know, if you chose the wrong religion, it's on you. God will punish you. So, like, they had that kind of understanding in a way, because it's not like today. You have the internet, you have the printing press, you have books. It wasn't like that. People were generally looking to their intellectuals. What's like where we look at our, like, if a historian tells me this and this happened and we believe it for this reason, I believe him. I might cross-examine him. I might ask another historian, is it true? I might do due diligence, but I'm not going to say, oh, this guy's he's a nobody, he knows nothing. You know, rulers had counselors, they had people informing them, and they made decisions. People had respect for that. People like, this guy knows what he's saying. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to play the last part because I think this is the last clip I want to play before we wrap up. And this sort of summarizes, if you like, the comparison between Islam and Peterson's perspective.
Of course it does.
It's definitely so. No, so that's a perfectly valid point.
Let me tell you something, Jordan Peterson. You are an epistemological pragmatist, from my understanding. You said before in an interview that anything which serves life is true. That's what you've said. I think it was Sam Harris. If this is the case, and you said it's nested in Darwinism, if this is your position, then the truth of the matter...
it's nested in a very complex manner in Darwinism.
Yeah, but if it's...
I mean,
if
I
it's
think
nested,
that highest truth is something like love. I think it's very much associated with the notions of love that are central to religious traditions. And so...
I'm with you, but you still believe that truth is utility, and you still believe, because that's the pragmatist position. And so truth is relative. What I'm saying...
Yeah, but I also believe that the basis of utility is love.
That's,
so I'm not so sure that you and I differ so much on that particular...
No, but Jordan Peterson, what I want to say to you is this, right? First of all, pragmatically, Islam is doing the best, because if you're talking about evolution, then we're talking about reproduction and survivability. And Islam has got the highest birth rates in the world today. It's the fastest growing religion by a mile. By 2100, it will be number one. So in your definition, it should be the most true, by the way. Number one. Number two is this, is that...
well, that's a lot of love, all that reproduction.
Don't try and change the subject now. Look, so number two is this. Look, Dr. Jordan Peterson, is I'll tell you that I think I've seen your struggle against postmodernism. I've seen your struggle against nihilism, and I don't think you will be successful. And I'm sorry to say it like this. And the reason why I don't think you'll be successful is because your framework is itself relativistic. If it's utility and epistemologically pragmatic, then truth is relative. And if truth is relative, what are you going to say to you actually agree with the postmodernists in that sense. I think you're closer to postmodernists than you think. In fact, the pragmatist position is not inconsistent.
It's a secret love.
It's not inconsistent, Jordan Peterson, with the pragmatic position that you hold. What we are offering you and
well,
the rest...
I'm going to detail out that in much more detail when I go to Cambridge and Oxford. So
okay,
I don't know. You should come. Why don't you come to one of the talks?
I'll come. Okay, just send me.
Do you want me to get? Do you want an invitation?
Absolutely.
I'll get you an invitation.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you come? Because I'm going to talk about
one
exactly
of the things
that.
in Islam is to always accept invitations as well and gifts. And I'm going to send you some gifts as well, my friend. Yeah.
All right.
Because we need to get you some gifts. Right?
All right.
Okay.
So look, I'm going to ask you one more. I got to stop.
That was a really beautiful part. You know, they're having some banter together, but nonetheless, there was a clear clash in terms of Peterson's critique of postmodernism and his framework being up for the same critique that he's actually critiquing the postmodernists with, and how Islam gives a foundation which is far stronger. So there's these multiple levels of, if you like, conflicts here. So what are your thoughts on this? Oh, sorry, I've still had to, yeah.
I think if it's pragmatism nested in Darwinism, if it's about what helps you move forward, and Darwin tells us it's survival and reproduction, then Islam is true by that definition. We have 4 wives. We're all about survival and reproduction. We're the best at survival and reproduction. Okay, now the Asian brothers, they're up there with us. You know, like, is that what you decline? It's true. If it helps life go forward, if it helps you survive and reproduce, that's true. If that's what you're saying, if that's how you clarify true, anything can be true as long as it helps serve that goal. Well, then you should embrace Islam for practical reasons. Why? Because all your problems with feminism and all this, gone. All your problems with LGBT and the he is, her, zer, gone. There's none of that. You're going to raise a child who's going to survive and reproduce. He survives and reproduces. He's programmed to, if you look at Islam, everything that's permissible is good for the family. Everything that's non-permissible is bad for the family. Like, Islam is designed in a way to help you develop a nuclear family. 2 parents, 3 or more children. That's the whole goal of Islam. And think about it for 1 second before you object. Think about it. My goal as a Muslim father is to raise children who are moral, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. If you dangle money in front of them, they're not ready to do anything for it that's illegal or bad or immoral. They're willing to earn, but without breaking moral rules. Yeah. If everybody did that, they can't be tempted to be immoral. Imagine the world we would live in. That's the mission, guys. By the way, your mission as Muslims, you worship God, yeah? And raise children who are morally responsible. This is your job. This is your job. This is your mission. If we did it, if we do it, the world will be an incredible place. I teach my kids never to be prejudiced against anybody. I tell my kids there's all sorts of people in the world. That's their life. That's their way. That's their system. That's their culture. We can have dialogue. We can exchange ideas. But I'm raising you to be this way. After when you grow up, you do what you want. I raised you a certain way. If I failed, I failed. If I'm successful, I'm successful. But I'm doing my best for sure. If everybody did that, we would have generations of people that respect their elders, are moral, would have peace in the world. Really, Plato said it best. You can't be moral and rich at the same time. I don't agree that. I don't think he was right. I think it was an overstatement. But he says, look, most rich people, they had to do something bad to get that money. They had to lie, cheat, steal. They had to manipulate. Now, I don't think that's totally true, guys. I know it's an overstatement. I think he knew it when he said it. He's just saying that, look, if you want to get rich quick, you got to do something bad. Okay, so generally speaking, not only like selling drugs, for instance, if you're a rich drug dealer, I don't consider you successful. That's not how, honestly, I don't consider you a successful person. I don't care how many Lamborghinis or airplanes or whatever. I don't consider that successful. You poison other people to be rich. I don't consider that successful. So what is the most pragmatic? Because I don't think Peterson would say, hey, Genghis Khan was successful because he survived and reproduced. His life went forward. More people were genetically. I don't think he would say that. I would say, look, that's not necessarily, I don't think he's pure Darwinian. I'd be shocked if he said that. Okay? Yeah. I think because he has a deep belief in morality, if you hear him talk. So what's the best way to propagate life and be moral? I think that's what the hijab is telling him. I think he said it correctly. Oh, that would be Islam. We propagate more than everybody, and we follow this moral code. Therefore, you would have generations of moral people. You'd have generations. You should. We're not living up to it per se, but we should have generation after generation of moral people. After that, what did he say? I'm forgetting now.
Well,
oh yes, love. Peterson said, look, it's not nested in Darwinian principles, but the highest form of truth is love. I'm going to agree with him on this. I'll tell you something, okay? If I told you, Sabor, I worship my wife, it would break your ears.
Absolutely.
It would break your ears. You'd be like, hey, wait a second. That's a special word, a special love only for one. Worship is too high of a word for a human being.
Yeah. That's
the highest. Can you name me something higher than that? Is there a word higher? No. He's correct in that sense. He's correct. The highest truth is submission to Allah, worship to Allah. And that's a love. That's a type of love. Reserved for only one. If you say worship about anything else, Muslims, we cringe. We can't even hear you. So you say that word, you better be Allah. Like you better be God at the end of that sentence. Because anything else, I don't care how beautiful, how rich, how perfect, there's nothing. There's no second place. There's no second place for us. So it's a word that would make you cringe if it's anything else. He's right. But why doesn't he say, I worship God, only for God? Love, like the highest truth is your relationship with God. There's master and there's slave. And if you say anything other than, if you say, oh, no, I don't see myself as, no, then you're arrogant. You see yourself compare. I'm a companion. I'm buddies with God. No. There's God, and then there's no second place. There's not even second place.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the Quran says, it says Allah, you worship Allah, and then he mentions your parents, respect your parents, but we don't put our parents as gods. There's nothing in the dunya we could even put into a competition with God. So this is the special type of love that we call submission. We give everything. We give everything we have. There's nothing that's for us. There's nothing. So this is the ultimate love. This is submission. He's figuring out Islam slowly. In my opinion, he's figuring out Islam. Because you tell me what people in the world openly say, worship. Love is not a strong enough word, my friend. Love is, if I tell you I love my wife, you'll be like, oh, that's good. That's okay. If I tell you I worship, just to prove to you that worship is too strong of a word, it would break your ear. A Muslim's going to be like, whoa, wait a second. Don't say that word, man. That's higher than love. That's too far. You went too far. So just to prove to you that worship is a higher word than love. He thinks that love is high. No, there's higher than love, my friend. There's higher than the word love. Yeah. Worship is a type of love where you give up absolutely everything. You give up absolutely everything. There is no more you even left. Okay, so he's right in that sense. He's discovering, in my opinion, he's discovering Islam slowly. He's peeling back the layers. He just hasn't gone far enough yet, because there is higher levels than love. Love is an appropriate term to use for my kids and my wife. I have a special term I won't use for anyone else. And that just goes to show that it's a level higher.
Yeah. This kind of reminds me of some Christians, and especially this is true with liberal Christianity in Europe. If you ask them, what is Christianity about? They wouldn't even say God. They would say, love thy neighbor. And what you alluded to earlier was amazing, which is, which religion explicitly, directly, unfettered shows that actually we love God because of God. We love Allah even if we live a life in which we are poor, we are destitute, we are ill, whatever. It's not about like this slot machine thing, you put in a coin and you get something out. I'm going to worship God because something good happened in my life, something bad happened, I'm going to disbelieve in God. No, we would say the highest form of love, like you said, for us, is the worship of Allah. And we do not care if people think that is primitive, that is backwards. And people have these types of things nowadays. I know I'm going to really damage your ears more than they've been damaged on any map by saying this, right? Follow your truth. It's about what your heart tells you. Follow your heart. I mean, we're all sick of this. But in Islam, it's not about follow your heart. It's about correct your heart so that you love the one who created your heart. It's a different paradigm, right?
If you follow your desires, in the end, you're gonna feel unfulfilled. If you want to take that journey, go for it. I don't stop people. I don't tell them, no, don't take that journey. If that's your business. But I know what you're gonna find at the end. Like, you're gonna go and you're gonna pursue all your dreams and all these things, and you're gonna end up with the same two possibilities: nihilism or God. And I think Jordan Peterson, he's getting there. He's questioning. He's doing a lot of soul searching. I think he's being authentic, and I hope he gets there. And I hope that, honestly, he finds his peace, because he seems to me also to be he's still soul searching. He seems to me like very emotional on his face. He's wearing a lot of emotion. But to circle back to what you said earlier, they asked Jesus, sum up the religion, sum up the Old Testament. It's love God with all your heart.
Yeah.
Which is worship, yes. It's definitely worship. With everything you have, the Jews will tell you, we openly worship God. They have no reservation about it. And love thy neighbor. It's beautiful. This is something really, really beautiful. This is something I think could be authentic. I'm not a biblical expert. I'm not a textual critic expert, even though I've studied Christianity for many years. I'm not an expert. But this is something I would say, I believe that the Prophet Isa alayhi salam would say this. I believe this makes sense. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. This is very, we have the same tradition in Islam. How could you go to bed when your neighbor's hungry? Are you really a Muslim if your neighbor's starving, and you ate and you're full and you went to bed, you're able to sleep? Me personally, I couldn't sleep. Well, this is very similar to what our traditions have a lot of similarities. But if I ask Jordan Peterson, do you worship God? I would wonder if he could just answer simply and just say the word yes. Or is he going to take me on a cruise of, he's going to give me a very complex answer, because he can't just simply admit and say yes. Could he? I don't know. I don't want to speak for him. I'm saying he couldn't. I'm just wondering if he could,
Yeah.
I think you'd find a lot of peace. Why not let the postmodernists say what they want to say? Let them be who they want to be. That's their choice. Look, this dunya is a test. We say it. You can't answer people's test for them. That's their test. Khalas. Look, the doors have been opened. We're allowed free communication. You could tell anybody about your ideology. You could write a book about it. You could write it on the internet. Nobody's stopping you. Now it's just an exchange of ideas. That's it. That's the level we've reached now. We're on a forum. We're all exchanging ideas. And I'm not offended at all when somebody has a different idea. You have a different opinion from me. That's no problem. Look, when in the story of Noah's on his ship and his son is going up the hill, running up the hill. He wants to save himself by climbing up a hill. God tells Noah's calling to him. He says, let him be. Let him go. He chose to go the hill. That's his choice. That's it. I personally, I'm not so bothered when people disagree with me. And I think that Muslims should take that attitude. Tell them what we believe. Learn yourself why we believe what we believe. Read the classical Muslim arguments. Read the classics. Understand philosophy. Understand theology. Understand all these things. And we should highlight, a very important difference. I think I would have loved to hear Hijab and Peterson talk about what's the difference between theology and philosophy of religion. Theology, you start with the belief in God. Is that what we're doing right now? Are they both starting with the belief in God? Or are we starting with philosophy, the philosophy of religion, which is, you have to do kalam. This is unique to the Arabs, guys. Very important. The Greeks didn't have kalam, philosophy of arguing for the proof of God. There was very, very little of that in Greek philosophy. Very little. This is very Muslim philosophy. And the Christians took it on wholeheartedly later on. Yeah. When they refer to the commentator, they're referring to Averroes. Averroes is the commentator. Later Christian thinkers, when they're on, and the commentator said this and that. You're talking about Averroes, a Muslim thinker who was commentating on Aristotle. Yep. The Christians wholeheartedly took this on. Yeah. But we have to define it and make it clear. Are we doing theology or are we doing philosophy of religion? Now we're coming into an age where Muslims need to learn the philosophy of religion. Theology 100 years ago was okay because everybody believed in God. Then it was just comparative religion. Yeah. So our Hijab and Peterson, if I would have to, ask them, are we doing comparative religion? Are we talking about, was Christ God, a man who walked on the earth and he died for our sins? Is this what we're talking about? Or are we talking about, does God exist? Are we doing philosophy of religion? Or are we starting with theology? God already exists. We all agree that. Let's go on from there. What is religion? What's morality? Okay, what are we talking about exactly? So these are very separate subjects that need time and attention. But the world is moving towards philosophy of religion. You don't have to prove to people God exists. 200 years ago, you didn't have to. You just have to do comparative religion. Muslims today, they're still stuck in comparative religion, which is fine. Yeah. We're always going to compare religions. However, they got to quickly remaster. And I'm not saying master, remaster. Because the Arabs, the Muslims, were masters of philosophy. And they had a very unique, Islamic philosophy had a very unique flavor that was beautiful and is lost because Muslims today think philosophy is a witchcraft. They're completely wrong. They're completely wrong. And anybody want to invite me on a debate or have a discussion about this, please do. Okay. When Ghazali critiqued the philosophers, he was calling the philosophers the blind followers of Aristotle. He wasn't talking about logic. Everybody uses logic. When I say philosophy, I'm talking about logic, like formal logic. Yeah. Are you a Muslim who's saying, we shouldn't use logic? Well, then you have to give me a reason. You'd have to use logic to tell me logic is not good. It's a self-defeating position. Okay, you can never, when the Quran says, who's more rightly guided, the blind or the seeing? What do you think that refers to? The one who uses his reasoning, his logic, trying his best. He understands he's not a perfect logician, but his intention is to look for the truth. He's striving and he's hoping God gives it to him. He's hoping God gives him some share in the truth. That's the Muslim position. I'm not good enough to get to the truth. I'm not smart enough. I'm not able enough. However, if I don't give up, if I keep clawing at it, if I keep working my way towards the truth, I hope to God, because only God can give me this truth. God gave me my ability to my intellect. God, who gave it to me? I built it for myself. No, everything is determined. You're a product of your nature and your nurturing, and none of them you're responsible for. I'm striving for truth. My heart is in the right place, and I hope it's bestowed upon me. I hope I come across it. And this is the attitude you should have. And Muslims need to fire that back up, because the Quran is constantly telling you to contemplate, to think deeply. Oh, no, don't bring philosophy around here. Why? Because you're untrained in philosophy. It's intimidating to you. And it's embarrassing that you argue against philosophy, because you're trying to use logic to fight logic. Philosophy is not it's not a witchcraft type of word for Greek obedience. The Greeks did philosophy, and before them there were civilizations that did philosophy. We just don't have it recorded. It's not a Greek invention. The Egyptians for certain had math, science, and philosophy for certain. We just don't have their records. But there's no doubt. There's no doubt they had philosophy. They had logic. There's no doubt. Look what they did. They changed the world. They had 5,000 years of Egyptian history. You think they didn't figure out logic? You think they were not logicians? Of course they were. Of course, logic, we can never turn our back to logic. Formally, at a common sense level, and at a formal level in university, at the highest level. It's the equivalent of saying mathematics is haram or geography is haram. Okay? So I agree. Look, I understand there's hearsay philosophy. There's kind of like, I would say we call it sophistry. But we have to deal with sophistry. The Greeks dealt with sophistry. The Muslims dealt with sophistry. The modern day Muslims, they think logic is sophistry. That's what they think it is. They're wrong. Totally wrong. The classical Muslims didn't think it was sophistry. They were masters of logic. And here's the thing. When we become masters of logic, we're going to have difference of opinion. We have to remain humble. You can never be so sure of yourself. You can never be so sure. People can always be in error. That's why you have to pray and always hope that God will give you a glimpse into what is true. And there are higher things than logic. This is what Ghazali is talking about in his biography. He's saying, look, there are things that are higher than formal logic. And this is how we know God. This is how we know we have certainty. And he's referring to intuition. He's talking about the fitra. He's talking about direct experience, etc. Muslims have to reconnect with this, because when they do, they will reach certainty. They'll have more confidence, and the world will know it. The world around you will know it. Like, if you try to convince me I'm wrong, man, you better bring an army of logicians with you, because even then you can't. Once you're upon the fitra, once you understand the concept of the fitra, everybody else is just guessing. They're just doing their best to guess what happened 1,000 years ago, what happened, what he said, what she said. They're trying to figure it out, and none of them are perfect at it, and they're doing their best. Okay, but the fitra is certain. So you can go to your grave with certainty. And this is the beauty of Islam. In the Quran it says, know your God. No, it doesn't say believe. It says believe also. But there's a point where it says no. Because there are levels of faith. There are levels of faith. Okay? So, for me, when Dawkins comes out with a new book, I'm not worried. I'm not the least bit worried. Because for me, he sounds like a dummy. And I don't mean that. I don't want to be name calling. I shouldn't say that. I should say, for me, it doesn't. So arguments are not compelling. Honestly, his arguments are not compelling in the least. One, he makes gross philosophical errors. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. And it's funny because in the Peterson hijab video, Peterson makes the same one. He says, look, if you're going to go to the unmoved mover or prime mover, there's a causal chain. There had to be one start to the chain, and that chain can't have a cause itself, because then you'd have infinite regress. And Peterson asks him, he says, well, by saying God, aren't you just moving it up one notch?
Yeah.
Well, that defies the definition of God. By definition, God doesn't have a start. He's uncaused. This is a philosophical error, a very well-known one that Dawkins did, and Peterson seems to be doing it also. So Hijab gently, corrected him, as he should. But by definition, God is not contingent. God is necessarily true by definition. It's analytically true. Contingent means something else had to bring it about. This computer I'm talking on is contingent. It was caused. It had a time and date where it was created. It depended on something else. I depended on my parents' meeting for my creation, for my existence. I'm a contingent thing. I'm not true by necessity. So, Dawkins did that famously when we were having a discussion with John Lennox, a philosopher, I think, from Cambridge. He was saying, look, I hope you're not referring to the God of Abraham here, because the God of Abraham, by definition, is uncaused. That's the whole point of Abrahamic religions. We're saying they're not a byproduct of two gods getting together.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of, I love the internet, because now we can have fascinating discussions about people having fascinating discussions. And this is what we need to do. And this is the way to
have the natural selection of ideas.
To have the natural selection of ideas, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
To get to know each other, the Quran says God made us different for us to get to know one another, to convince one another, to compel one another, to what's a great, I always tell my students, the two greatest feelings in the world is learning something and teaching somebody something. It's such a great pleasure to learn something. I always love when somebody teaches me something. I feel like I owe them a debt. And when I teach somebody, I hope that whatever I taught them made them feel good. I hope they're happy. I hope it made them feel like they've improved, they've gotten, they've grown as a person, and it's such a great feeling. No amount of money in the bank can give you that feeling. You feel like you've expanded your mind, and it's an intrinsic feeling you can't describe. I think the internet is doing that for so many people at such a great rate, and I think it's such a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
And I really thank Mohammed Hijab and Peterson for having that discussion. We all make mistakes. Please don't, like, if I try to correct one of them, or I could be wrong as well. Of course, we correct each other. I welcome it, and please don't take it as an insult to anybody. I have high regard for Peterson and Hijab. I think they're credible intellectuals. I think they're much smarter than me. I think they're super smart. I think they're, incredible people. And I think that they did Christianity and Islam a great service today. Not today, but whenever they did it last week, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Because that's how Christians and Muslims should behave. They should be a good example for other people to emulate. Islam and Christianity is about good behavior, morality, love, respect. If my neighbor is a Christian and my other neighbor is a Muslim, I expect and I demand that I feel safe around them because they're Christian and because they're Muslim.
Yeah.
If a Christian is really Christian and I feel under threat from him, I'll quote his book. I'll say, look, it doesn't make sense. You're supposed to love your neighbor. You're supposed to love your enemy. Not that I'm his enemy, but even if I was his enemy, he should treat me good. I wouldn't go and tell him, oh, obviously you're acting like this. No, it's the opposite. The Sam Harris method was a bad idea. And I wonder, doesn't he have Muslims friends? Like, he lives in the modern world. Muslims are everywhere. How do you say something so negative and so ignorant about Islam and then go around and go by go to your restaurant and sit or your neighbor's a Muslim or your somebody, like, how do you go around after in the world, travel the world and bump into Muslims left and right and not feel embarrassed that you're obviously cherry picking, insulting our sacred religion, something that we hold so true and so dear. And you're unabashedly insulting us.
Absolutely. And there's a degree of dishonesty that's evident because obviously he doesn't believe, and he cannot believe if he's an intelligent guy, the things that he basically says. Another way of, this is just one of the things that in their narratives, that they're saying outlandish things which can't possibly be held up to any scrutiny if they actually interact with Muslims. But there's also how they are intellectually dishonest when it comes to critique of their own worldview. So, for example, so you earlier on mentioned about Dawkins and the God delusion. There are very well-educated atheists who frown upon the God delusion. And again, you were mentioning about philosophy and logic, and people who some Muslims who supposedly say you're not supposed to use it. Well, let's look at what a philosopher of science, Michael Ruse, who's considered the most eminent academic in the world because of the number of publications he has, and he's cited everywhere. He said the God delusion made me embarrassed to be an atheist. Right? We're not. This is also very important. You mentioned about remastering philosophy. So if someone was to look at the works of Michael Ruse and then use them to actually show why Dawkins is wrong, what is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? With use of philosophy to actually challenge these erroneous ideas. His book, I went through it twice. The way I describe it is it's impossible to underestimate his arguments. They're so poor. It's so underwhelming when you read the book.
And he did it with such arrogance.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Look, we study philosophies. We study logic for decades, and this guy comes in and starts telling us what's logical because he has a background in science, and I don't even think he's a scientist.
Well, actually,
I think
so.
What's his degree? What's his actual training?
So just on this point, you made a very good point, and I just wanted to intervene there because something happened 2 days ago. Ed Wilson, who is a eminent scientist, who is the father of sociobiology, which later on became into evolutionary psychology, and somebody who is very well respected in the field. He passed away, right? And he passed away, and him and Richard Dawkins actually have a very colorful history, because Richard Dawkins, he popularized the idea of the selfish gene based upon the theory of kin selection, which he is not the originator of that idea. He merely popularized the selfish gene perspective. Now, Ed Wilson, who, again, he didn't have a religious bone in his body, he was this ardent secularist. A few years ago, he challenged the selfish gene perspective, the kin selection paradigm, with group selection. And what happened is there was an online dispute between Richard Dawkins and Ed Wilson. And Ed Wilson was being challenged by Dawkins. And Ed Wilson is somebody who is in academia. He has a huge status. However, in the popular sphere, Dawkins reigns far more greater in the public eye. So Dawkins was using his leverage to actually, his public leverage to challenge him, because essentially what Ed Wilson was doing was he was challenging the idea of the selfish gene, which makes Richard Dawkins look bad. So Richard Dawkins started saying things like, you know, there's all these scientists who support me and all of this. And Ed Wilson replied, well, if science worked according to numbers, then we'd still believe in the, you know, a geocentric view of the solar system and so on and so forth. Anyway, their dispute spiraled out of control and it ended up on BBC Newsnight. On BBC Newsnight, Ed Wilson was asked about his dispute with Richard Dawkins. And Ed Wilson, firstly, just before he went into Dawkins, he said, no scientist can say there is no God. So he's again, more like, you know, he doesn't say those categorical statements. But anyway, what Ed Wilson says is that there is no dispute between me and Richard Dawkins, because my disputes are with scientists, with researchers doing lab work. Richard Dawkins is a science journalist who reports what the scientists do. And this got me really rattled when I came across this a few years ago, because I always thought of him as a scientist. And when I actually did some research and looked into it, he has a PhD from Oxford in zoology. However, technically a scientist is someone who is doing research in the field, coming up with novel work. And Richard Dawkins has not been doing that. He's actually been an apologist for militant atheism for the majority of his life. And also, he has been regurgitating the works of scientists. So a better description is somebody who is a science journalist rather than a scientist. And what's interesting is you pointed that out yourself. However, we have credible evidence that not only Ed Wilson, but other scientists in evolutionary biology frown upon him. And I just want to plug another book, which is after Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. There's another book called The Selfish Dawkins. Or basically, I covered this book with Professor Shoaib Ahmed Malik on my channel, and it's a book written by a secularist and agnostic or an atheist. I've forgotten who she is, and she explains how Richard Dawkins has misrepresented evolutionary biology to fit his militant atheistic perspective. So we have to understand that these people.
That's my view. That's my view of him.
Yeah.
He's ramming his own personal. He's ramming his own personal worldview into science. He's conflating the two. Science has nothing to do with God. Philosophers of science tell us that science is the faith that the future will behave like the past. That's the kernel of what science is. It doesn't answer the question of God. It doesn't pose the question of God. There's no scientific experiment for knowing whether God exists or not. It's irrelevant to the scientific method. He's selling books. He's selling books.
This is the book, The Selfish Genius, right, by Fern Baker. And the reason I'm highlighting this is to show that he is not somebody that we should, really. I mean, like you said, right? It's self-serving what he's doing. Now, yesterday on Twitter, 2 days ago on Twitter, when Richard Dawkins put up his, because Ed Wilson passed away, and he put up a sort of tribute to him. But
who passed away?
Ed Wilson, the one who.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So I just want to read out something which I thought was very sneaky of him, right? So can you see this, right?
Yeah, I do.
Sad news of the death of Ed Wilson. He's a great blah blah blah, all these things, right? But then he says, great Darwinian, single exception, blind spot over kin selection, right? Here he's referring to Ed Wilson challenging Dawkins' popularized idea of the selfish gene, right? So what I did in return for this tweet, I did something cheeky, which is I put up the clip from BBC News now. Right? I'm just going to play that. I'm going to remove my.
Categorically, there is no such thing as God.
I know you've had quite a big history with Richard Dawkins and a different view of the natural selection process. Where are we on that now, in your view?
There is no dispute between me and Richard Dawkins, and never has been, because he's a journalist. And journalists are people who report what the scientists have found. And the arguments I've had have actually been with scientists doing research.
There is no such thing as
God. So that was hilarious.
I know you've had quite big.
So let me just unmute you.
Respect that, you know, he's a PhD.
Sorry, you were muted when you were speaking.
Sorry, no, but listen. Okay, he's not a scientist in the lab, but to be fair, he understands very well the scientific method.
Yeah,
he's not naive. He's a PhD. He said zoologist. I consider him to be a legitimate scientific mind. However, he is taking his journalistic skills, his personal opinion, using science to cram it into one book that he knows will sell. If he just wrote about zoology and his personal life, he wouldn't sell any books.
No.
He would just be 1 in a million. But if he writes something like, I forget the names of his titles, but something, I don't know, what was his name? What's the name of his most famous book?
Selfish Gene.
God Delusion or whatever, right? Is that him?
Yeah, God Delusion, yeah.
Okay, Selfish Gene, if you write God Delusion, you brought in religion now. You're pissing off the Christians, the Muslims, the atheists, the Jews. You're creating there's a market for it.
Yeah.
That was kind of like, okay, that's your opinion, fine. But don't bring science into it, because science is not exclusive to atheists. It's not. People might not know this, but the scientific method was formulated by, so you know this well, Hassan ibn al-Haytham. It's a Muslim invention. People are not going to like that I say this, but look it up. Look it up. It's not Roger and Francis Bacon. It's not the Bacon brothers 600 years later.
They were influenced heavily. Yeah.
Heavily influenced by the Muslim method. Now, why? Look, and the Christians were phenomenal scientists as well. It's not, I'm sure there was science even before Hassan ibn Haytham. I'm saying he formulated the modern day scientific method. I can't sit here and say that Aristotle was not scientifically minded. He was.
Absolutely.
He didn't have the scientific method per se, because it hadn't been invented yet, that particular method that we use today. And it's not an exact method, and it continues to evolve and be, get better and better. But the Sumerians were scientific. The Egyptians were scientific. They didn't call it that. They didn't use the exact same method. However, they used logic and empiricism, inductive and deductive reasoning to figure out the world around them.
Yeah.
I consider that science, not the exact definition of science we have today per se, but nonetheless, he's a scientific guy who used his own personal worldviews and talent as a journalist to sell books and cram his opinion down our throat. And he used it under the guise of science.
Yeah. And it's
very poor philosophy, and very, very, very weak, poor philosophy.
Absolutely. Which is the reason why he doesn't want to debate philosophers. He refused to debate William Lane Craig, but he had no problem going to a Muslim school in London and talking to teenage Muslim girls. He had no problem trying to refute them. John Lennox, the mathematician at Oxford, when he did manage to have 2 discussions with him, he was humiliated.
He was.
Because of his lack of, he did. But also I wanted to highlight another thing about this sort of Western supremacy, if you like, over the intellect, which you alluded to earlier, that even when it comes to philosophy, it's not just the case that the Greeks had their own philosophical tradition, other civilizations did as well. I wanted to highlight something for everybody to go and research. When I came across this a few years ago, it really rattled my mind how deluded I was in thinking that deep philosophical thinking was monopolized by the people around the Mediterranean Sea. What's interesting is in the 1960s, there was a philosopher called, well, he's still alive now, he's pretty old, Edmund Gettier. And Edmund Gettier came up with what's known as Gettier problem. Now, it's too deep of a topic to explain what the Gettier problem is, but I'll give you a quick sort of first pass history of this, right? So Aristotle came up with the idea that knowledge has three components. It has to be true, justified, and you have to believe it. So true, justified belief, this idea that knowledge is made of components, right? Now, Edmund Gettier showed in the 1960s through these things called the Gettier cases that you can have something which is true, have knowledge about it, and you're justified, but it does not count as
it's not
knowledge.
true. Yeah, I'm
it's not
familiar
true.
with it. And it's Plato. It's not Aristotle per se, but I understand what you're saying. Plato.
Okay.
It originated with Plato, not Aristotle. But Aristotle, of course, also used justified true belief, but it should be credited to Plato.
Okay,
But
good.
go on.
So thanks for that. So it's the Platonic idea reigned supreme for at least 2,000 years. What's interesting is Dahar Motara, he was an Indian philosopher in the 8th century. He actually came up with the Gettier cases in the 8th century.
Oh, I believe
So
it, 100%.
we're talking about 1,200 years before Edmund Gettier in the 1960s. So he challenged the idea of true justified. His paradigm was such that knowledge could not be classified as true justified belief. So, when we get this, even today, if you were to go and research true justified belief and look into why it's no longer accepted, and then they have, belief first epistemology as opposed to knowledge first epistemology, all these types of things. In the 8th century, an Indian philosopher in the Indus Valley region came up with these things. So, like you rightfully said, we're trying to remaster philosophy, and it's not just something which we can say is a Greek or a purely Western tradition. Because I think
where do you think the Greeks learned all that they knew? Do you think they invented it all? Like they're not the oldest civilization in history. They're the oldest democratic civilization, perhaps, yes, but they're not the oldest civilization. You think Pythagoras made up his mathematics? No, he must have learned it from Egypt.
Yeah,
we have some clues of where he might have got it, but the Egyptians today, they're not necessarily the great mathematician and builders they were yesterday. What changed? The Egyptians were the creme de la creme of civilization and technology, science and technology, and innovation. What happened? Well, something happened, and then they passed the torch on to the Greeks, and then the torch was passed down to the Arabs, and then from the Arabs to Europe. And here we are today, the modern day. It's going to be, you could say now Asia, and Asia's had the torch before. It goes from one civilization to the other. And then civilizations reach a golden age, they crumble, and then they recycle again, and they come back again. And it's time for the Muslim world to wake up, sober up. And I have theories on why, the Muslim world kind of had its lull. It has to do with the Mongols. Nobody really knows. There's no one scholar out there who's like, hey, this is what happened, and I know exactly why. There are theories. They're just ideas. They're sentiments. And I think we copied other cultures. We had we went through different phases, but it's time for the Muslims, especially with the age of the internet, to go back and reread Ghazali. And even though we don't necessarily agree with everything the Muslim philosophers say, go and know what they said, why they said it. They were stuck in a paradigm. They had a limited amount of knowledge, and they did their best with it. And that's what we're doing now. So go back. Don't make the same mistake they did. Don't be so arrogant to think that you're so sure. That's it. Go back humbly. Learn everything you can about logic, reason, and that's the number one critique in the Quran against the pagans. They're being irrational. They're believing in these gods. They're irrational. And then you come in, you tell me we don't want to study reason. Like, that's the number one critique God has against the pagans. They're being irrational.
And what's beautiful about this is, you mentioned Imam Ghazali about going back and looking at what they said. If I said today on the internet right now, everybody that's watching this on SC Dawah, all of the people who are, into Dawah and stuff, if I said to them, it is a communal obligation to give dawah, everybody would say, of course, we know this through the history of our jurisprudence and whatnot, that there are communal obligations, including taking care of widows and orphans, and itikaf and dawah is one of those communal obligations. However, if I said the study of science and mastering science and using that knowledge to help people is a communal obligation. That would sound postmodern, that would sound liberal, that would sound like somebody who's just trying to make stuff up. This is what Imam Ghazali said all those years ago. He said that there is a shortage of people who are actually looking into these beneficial sciences, and there are other people who are mastering other aspects of Islamic sciences, which are, if you like, in abundance, but here we have a shortage. So he called it a communal obligation to learn things like medicine. Now that's amazing if you think about it, because you're going to be rewarded for doing medicine. Now, Imam Ghazali did not say this, but I'm just throwing it out there. Philosophy is something which is joint at the hip with science. We make this distinction between science and philosophy, but this is pretty recent. Philosophy and science are joined at the hip and at the root, and philosophy is, if you like, the fountain from which science and other things branch off. So people like Charles Darwin, they were called natural philosophers.
Absolutely.
So by extension, why wouldn't that apply to philosophy if it can apply to science? Because science,
it's a problem of words. Like Ghazali didn't use the word philosophy to refer to reason. When I'm using the word philosophy, I'm talking about logic.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about blind obedience to Aristotle. Ghazali was criticizing. You have to understand, Aristotle was such an authority. If Aristotle said something, it was true. That's it.
That's what the medieval age was.
That's what Ghazali criticized.
Yeah.
He said it doesn't matter if Aristotle said it. We have to have proofs. You have to show me proofs. It doesn't matter who said what. We need proofs. We can't go by way of authority. This is what Ghazali's position was. Yeah. He went so far on that even I think he scared a lot of Muslims. He said, look, if somebody told me 3 is greater than 7, and his proof for it was he dropped down a staff and the staff turned into a serpent, meaning he did the miracle of Moses for me, I still wouldn't believe him that 3 is greater than 7.
Yeah.
So he was saying, look, this is how important logic is. That's what God gave us to find him.
Yeah.
He said truth is all one. There's nothing in the dunya, there's nothing in science or logic that's going to contradict God. He goes, stop being scared. God and truth is one. And he said some things that might disturb some Muslims, but the Muslims are wrong. He's correct. He's the most Muslim guy you ever met. Ghazali is the most, and that was the sentiment at his time. Let me tell you something. Nobody questioned Ghazali's teachings in his time. Nobody. He was the man. He was how do you be Muslim? Ask Ghazali. He's going to tell us how we're Muslim. What makes a Muslim? Ask Ghazali. He was incredibly influential. And today when Muslims go back and read him, like, hey, wait a second. No, Muslims, like Ghazali, in my opinion, he understood Islam really, really well. Like I can't tell you I've ever read anybody who understood Islam better than him, other than, of course, the elite. But we're not talking about that. Like the Prophet and Sahaba, of course, they're on another level. But for us who are trying to understand it intellectually, we weren't there. We're trying to understand it from the books and via logic, etc. We're not having firsthand experience.
Yeah.
Ghazali is the best, in my opinion. And
it's all contextual as well.
It's contextual. Sure, he was wrong about certain things. There's no doubt. There's no doubt he's human. He's not perfect. Look, the Quran says if the jinn and humankind came together, they couldn't produce for you a Quran. So don't ask me, the guy he's not as good enough to Quran. No kidding. Nobody's saying he could be at the level of a Quran. Nobody's saying that. He made mistakes. However, so did Plato. So every thinker makes mistakes. All I'm saying is he was a much better Muslim than we are. That's for sure.
Well, one way of thinking about it, and why I said contextual is, if there is a farmer who's, tilling away at the land, he's worshipping Allah, he's taking care of his nuclear family, he suffers from what feminists today call toxic masculinity, so he defends his honor, the honor of his wife and his family and everybody. We're not saying we go up to him and we give him the Ghazalian or Taymiyan framework and say to him, no, about this argument, that argument. No. If you're in a different context, like we are here in the West, where we are in hyper intellectualized society, in a society in which we have scientism and solipsism and Darwinism and philosophical critiques of Islam, you can't have that farmer's perspective. The farmer's happy, right, in that context. But today, we need the likes of Imam Ghazali, we need the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah, we need the likes of those great thinkers of Islam who were there, and even the great thinker from the Indian subcontinent, Allama Iqbal. You know, we need people to be able to take those ideas and say, okay, so let's see if this makes sense, and let's look at the logical flow, and okay, here's the problem with the premise or conclusion doesn't follow, whatever it is. We can't simply turn a blind eye to this entire perspective and go back to the farmer's perspective and say, yeah, we just you know, and I really don't like these answers. You know, some people say, oh, follow, you know, we don't need this, we need the Quran and Sunnah. And I say, yeah, I agree with you. But what makes you think the Quran and Sunnah does not promote science or mathematics or critical thinking? The Quran has mathematics.
That's actually it. You know, at the end, the Muslims were like, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, we did all this, and it's all in the Quran and Sunnah. There was that sentiment.
Yeah,
it's all there. However, you don't see it because you didn't go through the troubles of learning epistemology, logic, contemplation. It is all in the Quran and Sunnah. It is. You know, it's funny. I'm talking. I talk with Muslims. They say, oh, where is philosophy in the Quran? And I like to show them. And I have personal discussions back and forth with many different people. Absolutely. And once they start to see it, they're like, wow, you know, I didn't see that there. I didn't understand. I never took it that way. But there is definitely, if somebody studies logic for 20 years, 30 years intensely, and he comes back and reads the Quran, he's going to see something beautiful. He's going to understand at a higher level. Now, there are many levels to the Quran, but I'll tell you one thing. One thing is for certain. The Muslims who study logic and reason, I hate to use the word philosophy, they study epistemology, they will have a greater benefit from the Quran. They will get a greater benefit from the Quran, in my opinion. Now, I want to say one thing, one very important thing. There's a really good lecture. I listen to Yasser Qadhi a lot. I love Yasser Qadhi. I think he's amazing. He's an amazing communicator, a genuine human being. I can't say enough good things about him. And I really appreciate the work he does. Of course, like everybody, he makes mistakes. He's not perfect. None of us, you know, but he's really a brilliant human being. And he did a piece on the printing press. How when the printing press came about, Johann Gutenberg's printing press, the Muslims were so adamant about making it haram. For 300 years, they rejected it until it took Napoleon to invade the Egyptians and bring a printing press and give it to and make them use it by force. Why? You know, for something to be haram, you have to bring overwhelming evidence, they say. Why was the printing press such a threat to us? We have to ask ourselves that question, because when paper was discovered, the Muslims loved it, and the Muslims flourished with paper. They did amazing with paper. Paper was amazing for the Muslim world. It was the internet of our day, and Muslims wholeheartedly accepted it, and it made a boom, an economical boom, an intellectual boom. It was incredible. Yet when the printing press came, the Europeans accepted it and the Muslims didn't. I wonder why. It's a complex answer. It's a beautiful actually video. You should look it up. It's really, really fascinating. But that put the Muslims behind to a level that's uncalculatable.
But
Muslims,
it's
Yasser Qadhi putting printing press.
No, it's a famous talk. The thing is,
it is a famous talk.
Yeah, that historical contingency, which, you know, if anybody looks into it, and if you listen to the talk, and even if you don't listen to the talk, even if you just know cursory knowledge of what happened, you will see that there was no justification. It was just
there was no justification.
It was an arbitrary decision. However, what's very interesting is that that's a segue into other decisions that were made by Muslims, and I you know, there's this type of Ottoman nostalgia, so that, you know, people imagine as if the Ottomans did nothing wrong, or the Umayyads did nothing wrong, or the Abbasids did nothing wrong, or the Mamluks did nothing wrong, which is not true. They did make mistakes. And one of the things is that this was a major decision, but in micro decisions, if you look at what certain decisions that the Ottomans made, you know, you will find things which are not Islamic. You'd find that with the Abbasids, you'd find that with the Umayyads. So the thing is, what we have to realize is right now we don't have to cry that, oh my God, the Muslim world, because for civilizations to go through a peak, it takes hundreds of years, and when it goes through a decline, it takes hundreds of years. So when it comes to the Islamic civilization, we say, okay, these things set us off, and therefore we're going down. However, what's happening with the internet is that this is a game changer. This is, if you like, a life hack. Back in the days, we used to play snakes and ladders.
It's the printing press all over again.
Yeah, you jump onto a ladder and you go straight up. We talk about Muslim countries, Firas, and I want your thoughts on this. We talk about Muslim countries, but there's one Muslim country, if you like, a Platonic country, right, which no one talks about, which is the Muslims in the West. The Muslims in the West constitute such a large, diverse, influential group of people that they, in a way, they can be counted as a country. Now, I don't mean that in a political sense. I mean that in a purely collective sense. So we have access to all of the resources. I mean, many of our guys, Hijab recently graduated from Oxford University. We have one of our students at Londonia, he's currently at Cambridge. We have one of my friends at the moment, he's a research associate at Cambridge. Another one was a research associate at Oxford. I'm sure you know people in Muslims in top places in Canadian universities. We have this golden opportunity. So I don't want anyone to cry, golden age was so long ago. We can make a golden age in the next couple of decades, inshallah. We have all of the resources. And look, we shouldn't shy away from this fact. The Western world works on merit. Yes, there can be discrimination. Yes, there can be racism and these things. But in academia, things work on merit. It doesn't matter how dark you are, how light you are. If you get the results, the chances are you can get into top universities, you can work in top forms. So we should make the next couple of decades, the Muslims here in the West, use the resources. Inshallah. And what does the Prophet ﷺ teach us? I'm going to paraphrase a narration here, which is, the best of you is the one who's the most beneficial to mankind. I'm so happy that Muslims are right at the forefront. I mean, of finding the next penicillin. I know Muslims who are working on those types of projects. Inshallah. And this is what, inshallah, we need to work on.
Yeah, and I think the internet is going to help us learn to demystify the word philosophy. It's just such a burden on Muslims. Yeah. Just use the word logic. Are we allowed to study logic? I mean, if you've read the Quran, I don't understand how somebody could read the Quran and be like, hey, no, we're not allowed logic. It's the complete opposite. The Quran is constantly telling you to be rational. Like, it's amazing to me that people could be so... I think it's really the misunderstanding of the word philosophy. It's just a major misunderstanding. Like, tell me what you mean by philosophy. When you say philosophy is haram, like, tell me what you mean by that. What's the word philosophy mean to you? Okay, let's use the word logic. Let's call it epistemology. There's nobody in the world. It would be the equivalent of saying, oh, algebra is haram. Like, nobody says that, right? Algebra is an Arabic word. Algebra is like, there's nobody who would say that. Yeah. Nobody would say that. So absolutely. No Muslim should ever. So anyways, I think the internet age is already it's already full stride, and everybody's going to use logic and philosophy. It's going to happen. We're becoming more and more a leisure society, meaning the Greeks had a lot of time for philosophy because they had slavery. They were a leisure society. They sat around thinking. They had the time and the luxury to sit around and ask themselves, how many grains of sand would fill up the entire universe? Oh, that's interesting. Let's try to do a calculation. Why? Because their bellies were full, their enemies were at a distance, and they had leisure time. And of course, time is of the essence. But now the vast majority of the world, they're not starving to death. So right now we're living in a day where the intellect is becoming more and more exercised. We're not working 20 hours in the field, come home, collapse, wake up at 6 a.m., do it again. No, we have plenty of time for academia now. We have plenty of time. We have the internet now. We have books on tape. We have books on audio. Like, we have so much information that it's impossible not to become an intellectual now. It's become impossible. Like, if you're not exercising your intellect, you're doing it on purpose. Like, you're really going far and beyond to not exercise your intellect. Like, it's actually become a joy now. It's so convenient to exercise the intellect. Muslims need to embrace it wholeheartedly, like they should have embraced the printing press.
Absolutely. And if they do, then you would get what we got with the Mohammed Hijab debate, which is why we did this live stream.
Exactly.
Where you have somebody who's 30 years old, and 30 is for an intellectual. I mean, I would really say an intellectual is 50 plus. That's the way I would generally see it. Yes, you can reach, you have intellectuals before that, but usually wisdom comes later. But you have somebody like Peterson, who is definitely an intellectual. Then you have Hijab, who's a younger intellectual. And that's, him being able to defend Islamic ideas, him being able to expound upon Islamic values, to explain it from a Western context in a way that's relatable. The other day I got an email, and inshallah we're going to have him on Saturday. I got an email from somebody who was born and was raised in what was then referred to as the Soviet Union, and so therefore with materialism and Darwinism and scientism and feminism and all these naturalistic perspectives, and that person believes in God, and they saw the hijab discussion with Peterson, and they don't have a religion, and they were so fascinated that now they're looking into Islam. So we have this powerful way of communicating with people or using the internet. Why should we neglect the tools which are available to us? Like you said, you can read, you can write, you can have discussions. I mean, I learn a lot whenever I bring you onto a live stream. So all of these things are available, and the way we should consider it is we should consider this as a just war of the pen. This is a just war of the pen in the battle of ideas, because essentially we want the Islamic paradigm to be one of the available options for people. At the moment, what are people doing when they look at options? They actually look at nihilism and Christianity. Those are the only two options people generally look for in the Western world. And I've met people who were hardcore militant atheists and they became Christians. Like, for me, this was like, okay, why did you go from militant atheism to Christianity? Because all they saw was the false dichotomy between nihilism and Christianity, which is in a way what Peterson may be, attracting those crowds.
I agree with you. And I think Hijab and you guys are doing a fantastic thing on the internet. I mean, the kids can relate to you guys because you understand the West, you understand Islam, and it's a great medium, because sometimes, a sheikh from the Middle East, he doesn't understand the worldview or the experiences of the youth that he's talking to. So they can't necessarily always relate. It's too formal. It's too inaccessible, their concepts. Whereas when you're in the middle between the two, you're a Westerner, but you also understand Islam, it's so much more relatable and understandable. And you can put the ideas in a way that your listeners can understand. So there's definitely a massive market for that, absolutely. And Hijab is very special. Muhammad is a very special intellect. He's genuine, he's authentic, he's super sharp, super intelligent. And if he doesn't know something, he'll research it. He has a passion for learning. He has an incredible vocabulary. My God. I need like 4 or 5 dictionaries sometimes when he's talking. I'm like, hold on, let me get my dictionaries. And even sometimes when I Google the words he used, the Google tells me, I don't know, ask Hijab what this means. He's such he always fascinates me with his incredible vocabulary. And he's just a brilliant guy. Honestly, I think he's a great blessing to the Ummah.
Absolutely. So for us, I've had you for, having you for 5 minutes is a luxury, but I've had you for 3.5 hours. And next time I'm definitely next time I'm going to cap it at an hour or so.
No problem. It was a pleasure, man. Today I took the evening off, actually, so I'm okay.
Oh, brilliant. Any last message before we end?
I in the end, I like to say, what do Christians, Muslims, and Jews need to always remember? Our religion is about being a good, just person. At the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. And be honest. If you find the argument for one religion over the other compelling, and you're honest about it, and you're not agreeing because you want to be loyal to a certain people or culture, no, you're really putting God first. You're being genuine, and that's the conclusion you landed on. The best of your knowledge, the most sincere, open heart. I think you have nothing to fear. I think the Quran tells you have nothing to fear. I think Christianity and the Torah tell you have nothing to fear. However, if you hear something and you know it to be true, but because of your cultural ties, you put anything above the truth, it's more practical for you, it's more beneficial for you if you deny the truth. I think you're only doing harm to yourself, and you're distancing yourself from God. This is what I think our three religions are really teaching. And yes, they cannot all be right. We have differences, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
But we should focus, like the Quran says, focus on what we have in common and work from there.
Absolutely.
We can have civil discussion, we can have difference of opinion, and I think Hijab and Peterson did something beautiful. They did something fantastic. And I think a lot of the online drama is going to be embarrassing in the years from now.
Yeah.
Peterson and Hijab really took steps forward to bring opening people's minds. Because you know, Subur, when you insult somebody, you close their mind. They don't want to hear your arguments no more, even if they make sense. So what? You just insulted me. You just insulted my culture. You just called me stupid. You just called me I'm embarrassed. I don't want to hear what you have to say. Now I'm this. There's a personal issue. That's why Sam Harris went wrong. I don't like to listen to Sam Harris, not because he's not a smart guy. I don't want that kind of energy in my psyche.
Yeah.
I would love if he can give me an argument against Islam, sure. But the fact that he insults us, I don't want to give him the time of day, because then he just insults people more. Why? Because you clicked. Yeah. You clicked on his video, you gave him time and attention, you put money in his bank account. He's like, hey, let me do it again. I don't like to empower those people. So for me, I like to keep it in a wholesome spirit, a friendly spirit, a kind spirit. Open criticism is okay. Cross-examining each other is okay. It's welcome. That's why I really appreciate Hijab and Peterson. They did something beautiful. I recommend that people listen to it. Those guys are exemplary. And I congratulate them both, man. They really did something fantastic.
Absolutely. So Jazakallah khair, brother Firas, for your insightful input in this landmark discussion. Inshallah, we're going to have you again in the future discussing other important areas. I'm guessing toxic masculinity. We need to there's a lot to say on that. So until next time, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.